She asked a billionaire to be her husband for one night. He said yes. Neither of them expected what happened next. Lily Bennett walked into Damien Cross's life with tears on her face and a desperate favor on her lips. And in that single reckless moment, two strangers made a deal that was supposed to last one wedding weekend. It lasted the rest of their lives. But before the happy ending, there was a lie that nearly destroyed everything. A sacrifice made out of love that looked exactly like rejection, and a little girl who just wanted someone to stay. This is not a perfect love story. This is a real one. Hit like, drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every single part matters. The rain came down hard on West 74th Street, the kind of rain that made the city feel like it was leaning in on you, pressing the air flat against your lungs. It drummed against the awning of a small cafe called Birch and Brew, rattling the old frame windows and turning the sidewalk into a shallow river that swallowed fallen leaves whole. Inside, the cafe smelled like espresso and brown butter, and something faintly of cinnamon, the kind of smell that made people feel, for exactly as long as they sat there, that everything was going to be fine. Lily Bennett was wiping down table 4 when she heard the bell above the door. She didn't look up right away. After 3 years of waitressing, the bell was just background noise, the same way the hiss of the steam wand or the low murmur of the radio behind the counter had become part of the interior geography of her days. She finished the table, tucked the cloth into her apron, and turned. He was already seated. Damien Cross had a particular way of moving through spaces. Quiet, deliberate, like a man who had long since stopped needing to announce himself to anyone. He wore a dark charcoal coat that was almost certainly more expensive than Lily's monthly rent, but he wore it the way some men wore their old college sweatshirts, naturally, without thinking about it. He'd hung it over the back of the chair himself. He never waited for anyone to take his things. He was looking at his phone, but not really reading it. His eyes weren't moving. Lily had noticed that about him over the months he'd been coming in. The way Damien Cross, for all his obvious precision in business, sometimes just sat. Like the world got too loud inside his head, and the only solution was a corner table at a small cafe where nobody cared who he was. Which was its own kind of irony, because Lily absolutely knew who he was. Everyone in New York with a Wi-Fi connection and a passing interest in business news knew who Damien Cross was. 32. Self-made. CEO of Cross Capital Group, a private equity firm that had, in under a decade, reshaped the landscape of mid-market tech acquisitions along the eastern seaboard. There had been a feature in Forbes 2 years ago. She remembered it because Connie, the cafe owner, had shown it to her on her phone and said, "That's the man who tips 40% on a black coffee," with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures. He had a daughter. Lily knew that too, because he sometimes came in with a small, serious child with dark curly hair who sat across from him coloring in a notebook while he read contracts. The girl's name was Maya. She was 6, maybe 7. She never asked for anything without saying please. Lily picked up her order pad and walked over. "The usual?" she asked. Damien glanced up. He had a face that wasn't quite handsome in the conventional, obvious way. It was more interesting than that. Strong jaw, a little unshaven, eyes that were a dark, settled gray, like storm clouds that had already decided where they were going. There was a scar, faint and old, along the left side of his chin. She'd never asked about it. "Please," he said, "and maybe something to eat tonight, whatever's good." "The mushroom toast is good. The soup is better." "Soup, then." She wrote it down. Neither of them said anything for a second, which wasn't unusual. Damien Cross was not a man who filled silence for the sake of it. But tonight something felt off. There was a tension in the way he was sitting, a tightness around his jaw. "Rough day?" Lily asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her again. "Isn't it always?" It wasn't a question. She nodded once and went to put the order in. Tuesday and Friday evenings. Those were his nights. Lily had started tracking this approximately 6 weeks after he became a regular, not intentionally, but because the human brain is a pattern recognition machine, and hers had quietly logged the information the way it logged all useful things. The regular's preferences, the tables that wobbled, the days when the espresso machine ran 20 seconds slow. Damien Cross. Tuesday and Friday, corner table by the window, black coffee, sometimes food, always a good tipper. Never talked on the phone while ordering, never snapped his fingers or called her sweetheart, or looked through her the way some of the wealthier customers did, as if waitstaff existed in a slightly different dimension from real people. He looked right at her when she spoke. That, she had noticed early. It was not as common a quality as it should have been. They had accumulated over months a quiet set of small exchanges that didn't quite add up to friendship but weren't nothing either. He knew she'd gone to culinary school for 2 years before money ran out, and she'd pivoted to waitressing while she figured it out. She knew he had a standing rule about not taking work calls before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m. and routinely broke it on both ends. He knew she made her own hot sauce and kept a jar of it at the counter for customers who asked. She knew he took his daughter to the park on Sunday mornings regardless of weather, even when he'd been working until midnight. These were small things, but small things had a way of adding up, Lily thought, if you weren't paying attention. She brought the soup out at 8:15. The cafe had thinned out. Just 2 other occupied tables, a couple sharing a slice of cake by the window, and an older man grading papers in the corner. Damien was still looking at his phone, still not reading it. Lily set the soup down, started to turn. "Thank you, Lily." She paused. He used her name rarely, and only when he was being deliberate about it. "You're welcome." "Can I ask you something?" She turned back. His expression was neutral, but there was something underneath it, the faintest edge of something she couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or careful intent. "Sure? Do you enjoy working here?" She blinked, of all the questions. "I mean, yes. Connie's good people. The regulars are mostly fine." She tilted her head. "Why?" "I was thinking about the hot sauce thing." He nodded toward the counter. "You told me you make that at home. You've mentioned once or twice about opening your own place." "Once or twice," she agreed carefully. "I was wondering if you'd ever looked into the commercial licensing process, the zoning regulations in Manhattan for new food service businesses." He picked up his spoon. "It's a maze, but there are people who can help navigate it." Lily stared at him for a moment. "Are you offering to help me navigate city zoning regulations?" Something in his expression shifted. Just a fraction, like a window opening. "I'm saying the option exists." "Mr. Cross?" "Damien." That's a very specific thing to say out of nowhere. He dipped his spoon into the soup. "I think about practical problems. It's a professional hazard." He looked up. "You're talented. The food you've made for this cafe, the specials, the ones you bring in when Connie lets you experiment, they're genuinely good. It seems like a waste." Lily opened her mouth, closed it again. She was used to compliments from customers. The throwaway kind? "Delicious. Honey, you should be a chef." And she'd learned to let them pass through her without hooking. But this was different. He said it without warmth, almost clinically, like he was stating a fact about a spreadsheet. Somehow, that made it land harder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me. Think about it." He turned back to his soup. "The option exists." Lily went back behind the counter and stood for a moment looking at nothing in particular, aware of a strange warmth in her chest that she could not entirely account for. "Don't be an idiot," she told herself, in the firm, slightly exasperated internal voice she reserved for moments of emotional vulnerability. "He's a regular, he's being nice. That is all." She believed it mostly. It was a Friday evening, 3 weeks later, when everything changed. The cafe was 40 minutes from closing. The couple by the window had gone. The paper grading professor had long since packed up. Damien was at his corner table with a contract spread open beside his coffee, making notes in the margins the way a doctor annotates a chart. Precise, humorless, efficient. Lily heard the back door open and close, which meant Connie had gone home and left her to lock up. The dishwasher was running its last cycle. In another half hour, the city would close its eyes over this small pocket of warmth, and she would walk 12 blocks home in the rain. It was a night like any other night, until it wasn't. She was reaching for the light switch behind the counter when she knocked a stack of order receipts to the floor and crouched to gather them, and when she stood up, she saw her own reflection in the darkened glass of the service window. And behind her own reflection, her phone screen lighting up on the counter with a message. She picked it up. The message was from a group chat she shared with her friends from college. 5 women who had stayed connected across the scattered geography of their adult lives. The message was from Priya, who lived in Connecticut now and was getting married in 3 weeks. "Guys, I know I've been weird about the seating chart, but you should know. I invited Jake and Serena. I know that's complicated for some of us. I hope that's okay, Lily. You know I love you. Just please come. It won't be the same without you. Lily read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the counter, very carefully, and stood perfectly still for approximately 4 seconds. Jake and Serena. Jake Holloway, who she'd spent 2 years with, who told her she was the most important person in his life 6 days before she found out he'd been seeing Serena Vance, whose family owned a stake in a commercial real estate firm, and who wore things that looked like they cost more than Lily's entire apartment for the better part of those 2 years. Jake Holloway, who had not, when he left, been unkind exactly. He'd been careful, measured, which was somehow worse. I love you, Lily. I do. But Serena and it just makes sense. You understand. I think you understand. She had nodded. She had actually nodded. Because she'd been so hollowed out by shock that she'd defaulted to agreeableness, like her spine had quietly left the building. That was 14 months ago. She hadn't seen him since. And now she was going to see him at Priya's wedding. With Serena. Probably with Serena in something flawless, saying something charming, being everything that made sense. Lily became aware, somewhat suddenly, that she was gripping the edge of the counter hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. She breathed out, reached up, pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes. Did not cry. She was at work. She would absolutely not cry at work. Lily. She dropped her hands. Damien was watching her from across the cafe. He'd closed the contract. His coffee was pushed to the side. He was just looking at her with that level, gray-eyed attention that she'd gotten used to but had never quite gotten comfortable with, because it was the kind of attention that didn't let you pretend. Sorry, she said automatically. I'm fine. You need anything? No. He paused. Are you all right? Yes, absolutely, just... She glanced at her phone. Life, you know? She turned away to start wiping down the counter. She could feel him still watching her. She kept her back to him and wiped the same spot 3 times. You don't have to tell me, he said, but you also don't have to pretend. That, for reasons she could not entirely explain, was what broke her. Not all the way. She didn't dissolve or anything so dramatic. But she stopped wiping the counter, and she put the cloth down, and she turned around, and she said, with a flatness that was its own kind of honesty, my ex-boyfriend is going to be at my best friend's wedding in 3 weeks, with the woman he left me for, and I have to go because I'm in the wedding party, and I really, genuinely do not want to be the person who shows up alone and has to smile through it. Damien said nothing. I know that sounds pathetic, Lily added. It doesn't, he said. It sounds human. She looked at him. He wasn't being kind in a performative way. He was just stating a fact the way he always stated facts. Without drama, without softening. She exhaled. I don't know what I'm going to do. Damien was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, looked back at her. And then, in the measured tone he might use to propose a merger strategy, he said, I could go with you. The cafe was very quiet. Somewhere in the back, the dishwasher clicked off. Lily blinked. I'm sorry? To the wedding. He turned his coffee cup in its saucer, a small habitual gesture. If you needed someone to come with you. Why would you? I'm not doing anything that weekend. He paused. And I think it would be useful to you, practically speaking. Lily stared at him. You don't even know me, not really. I know enough. His voice was even. I know you're kind to people who don't deserve it. I know you work harder than you're paid for. I know you've been carrying something heavy for a while, and you don't complain about it. He picked up his coffee. That's enough. She kept staring. She was aware this was a bizarre conversation, and that she had entered some kind of territory she didn't have a map for. It's a wedding, she said finally. It's a whole event. People would ask questions. They can ask questions. I'd have to. She stopped, thought. I might have to say we're together. That's fine. Damien. She said his name deliberately because she felt the need to anchor something. People would think we're a couple. He set the cup down. Yes, he said. I assumed. We're not. No. A beat. But for a wedding, we could be, if that would help you. Lily stood in the middle of the empty cafe, under the warm, low light, with the rain still going outside and her phone still showing Priya's message, and she looked at Damien Cross, this quiet, complicated, careful man she'd been serving coffee to for 9 months. And she thought about Jake Holloway's face when he left, the way he'd said "you understand" like it was a kindness, and something small and tired and angry inside her said, "Why not?" "Okay," she said. He looked up. "Okay?" she said again. "Yes. Thank you." He nodded once. "Good." He reached for his coat. "We should probably talk, figure out the details." "Right." She let out a breath. "Details?" She laughed, not happily, but genuinely, with a kind of absurd disbelief at the situation. "I just asked a billionaire to pretend to be my husband." He paused, coat half on. "Did you?" "I thought I offered." "Same difference." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, more like the idea of one, restrained at the last second. "Get your coat," he said. "I'll walk you home. We can talk on the way." They walked 12 blocks in the rain. Damien had an umbrella. Lily didn't. He held it over both of them without making a thing of it, which she appreciated. They walked close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, and neither of them acknowledged this. "How long have you been going to these people's weddings?" Damien asked, after half a block of rain sound. "Priya and I met freshman year of college. She's one of my oldest friends. I'm a bridesmaid." Lily's voice was flat. "I have a dress that cost me $200, and I have been referred to in the invitation as Lily Bennett, the laugh of the party." The laugh of the party. Her words, she means it kindly. "What does Jake know about you? What would he expect from someone you're supposedly with?" She thought about it. "That's the thing. He knew me pretty well, the real me. So if I show up with someone completely different from what he'd expect, it'll read as a performance." "What would he expect?" Lily pulled her jacket tighter. "Honestly, he'd expect me to be a little sad, a little brave about it, making a good show of being fine." She glanced sideways. "He'd be ready for me to be mostly fine and quietly not." "So the goal isn't just to show up with someone, it's to show up happy." "Yes." "That's harder to fake." "I know." She looked ahead. "I wasn't planning to fake it exactly. I need to get through the weekend without unraveling. Having someone there, having—" She stopped. "A person on your side," Damien said. She looked at him. "Yeah, that." He thought for a moment. "Tell me what he's like, Jake." "Why?" "Because knowing who I'm dealing with in a room is useful information." Lily almost laughed again. He really did approach everything like a business problem. She found it oddly comforting. "He's charming, good-looking. He's the kind of person who's very good at making you feel seen, and then you realize later that he's good at making everyone feel seen, which isn't the same thing." She paused. "He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He just chose differently, and he didn't tell me until after. The woman he's with now, Serena. Her family has money, real money, the kind that doesn't have to say it's there." Lily's voice was carefully neutral. "She's beautiful. I've met her. She's not the villain. She's just the person who made more sense to him. And you think he'll be there expecting you to still be in pain. I think he'll be there expecting to feel relieved that he made the right call." Her voice came out harder than she intended. She breathed. "I don't want to give him that." They turned a corner. The rain had thinned to a drizzle. Damien lowered the umbrella slightly. "We'll need a story," he said. "Something consistent. How we met, how long, all of it." "We met here. That part's easy, sir. It's true." She glanced at him. "We just changed the nature of it." "How long have you been bringing me coffee?" 9 months, give or take." "So 9 months. Somewhere in that time it became something else." He said it like he was outlining a project. "Simple. Hard to poke holes in because most of it actually happened. You really are good at strategy." "I'm good at making things difficult to disprove." He paused. "There's a difference." She looked at him in the dim, wet light. "Who are you, actually?" It came out without planning. He turned his head to look at her, and for a moment there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Something unguarded, or the edge of it. "That's a complicated question," he said. "Most real ones are." He looked ahead again. "I'm someone who built something from nothing and discovered that having everything you aimed for doesn't answer the questions you were trying to escape." A pause. That's more than I usually say. Lily was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. You have a daughter, she said finally, because it seemed like a window she was supposed to notice. Maya. The word changed something in his voice. The carefully maintained neutrality softened, almost imperceptibly. She's 6. He stopped. She's the best thing in my life and the thing I'm most afraid of failing. What happened to her mother? The question was too direct. She knew it immediately, felt the slight shift in the air between them. I'm sorry, she said quickly. You don't have to. She left. His voice was even, measured. When Maya was 18 months old, we were wrong for each other from the start. She knew it before I did. She's in Chicago now. She sees Maya 4 times a year. A beat. Maya calls it her Chicago visits. She's very matter-of-fact about it. Kids adapt. Do they? They adapt or they don't show you when they don't. He sounded like he was speaking from somewhere uncomfortably specific. They stopped at the corner of her street. The drizzle had stopped entirely. The city gleamed around them, wet and lit and indifferent. This is me, Lily said. She gestured down the block toward a walk-up with a yellow light above the door. Damien looked at it, then back at her. Saturday next week. Could you come to dinner? Bring your schedule for the wedding weekend so we can plan. She nodded. Sure. Somewhere public, he said. We should be seen together before the wedding. If you're comfortable with that. Are you asking me on a practice date? I'm asking you to dinner for logistical purposes. She almost smiled. Right, logistical purposes. She hugged her jacket around herself. Damien. Yes. Thank you, really. She searched his face for something to read and found, as usual, that he was difficult. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. He was quiet for a second. No, he agreed, but I want to. He said it simply, without embellishment, the way he said most things. Get inside. It's cold. She went. She didn't look back, but she heard him stand on the corner for a moment before his footsteps moved away, measured and unhurried, back into the city. The dinner was at a restaurant on the Upper West Side. Not flashy, but the kind of place where the lighting was warm and the tables had enough space between them that you could have a real conversation. Damien had chosen it. Lily arrived first and was briefly impressed by her own capacity for punctuality under stress. She'd worn her nicest dress, then changed out of it into a dark green top and dark trousers, then changed back into the dress, which was dark blue and had a collar she liked. She'd stood in front of her bathroom mirror for approximately 6 minutes longer than was reasonable and told herself it was because appearances mattered for the practical exercise of convincing people they were a couple. She believed this approximately 40%. Damien arrived 6 minutes after her, which she later learned was his standard. He never arrived first to social situations. He ordered wine without making a production of it, asked her preference, and actually listened to the answer. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the plan, not at first. They started there, mapping out the story, the details, the timeline of a relationship that had supposedly grown out of 9 months of Tuesday and Friday evenings in a cafe. But then the food came and somehow the conversation drifted. He talked about Maya, the way parents of young children sometimes can't help but talk about them. Not showingly, but in the way someone shares evidence of something they're still slightly astonished by. She told me last month that she wants to be a marine biologist, he said. She's 6. She barely knows what marine means. But she has a library book about the deep ocean that she's been carrying around for 2 weeks. And she talks about anglerfish like they're personal acquaintances. Do you take her seriously? Of course. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't I? A lot of parents don't. They think kids' interests are phases to be managed. He shook his head. She has a right to be interested in whatever she's interested in. My job is to not crush it. A pause. Although I did have to explain that anglerfish are objectively terrifying, and she informed me I was wrong and that they're misunderstood. Lily laughed, a real one. It surprised her. Damien watched her laugh, and something in his face went quiet in a way she didn't quite catch in time. He talked about his company, not the way people talk about their companies at networking events, but the way someone talks about a thing they built with their hands and have complicated feelings about. He'd started it with a partner, a man named Ross, who'd been his roommate in grad school and who'd left the company 5 years ago to take a tenure-track job at Columbia, and Damien still sounded very faintly like he hadn't quite closed that door. Do you miss having a partner? Lily asked. In business, yes. He turned his wine glass slowly. You make worse decisions alone. You need someone who'll tell you when you're wrong. You seem like someone who doesn't love being told he's wrong. I don't love it, he agreed, but I know when I need it. He looked up at her. That's a different thing. Lily told him about culinary school, about the year she'd spent dreaming about it before she got the scholarship, the 2 years of studying under chefs who ranged from brilliant to terrifying, the moment she'd realized she couldn't afford to finish and had to make a different plan. It wasn't tragic, she said, making her voice light. I just had to adjust. You adjusted away from something you wanted. Yeah, but I didn't stop wanting it. She swirled her water glass. The cafe idea. It's still real for me. It's not just a nice thought. I have notebooks. I have a business plan, sort of. I have a whole vision for what the space should feel like. What should it feel like? She thought for a second. Like Saturday morning. Like you're not in a hurry. Like someone made breakfast because they wanted to, not because it's their job. She caught herself. Sorry, that sounds sentimental. It sounds like you know exactly what you want. I know what I want, she said. Getting there is the problem. He looked at her for a moment. Problems have solutions, he said. Usually more than one. She looked back at him. The restaurant was warm and quiet around them. The evening had done something strange. It had started as logistics and turned into something else entirely, and she wasn't sure at what point the shift had happened, only that it had. Damien, she said carefully, are we going to be able to do this? Actually convince people? He leaned back in his chair, considering. You mean, will we look like people who care about each other? Right. He seemed to weigh this with genuine seriousness. I think we already do, he said. She looked down at the table. Yeah, she said quietly. I think you're right. The weekend before the wedding, Damien introduced Lily to Maya. This was not part of the original plan, at least not an explicit part. But Maya had been with him one Friday evening at Birch and Brew, coloring at the corner table, and Lily had been working, and the introduction had simply happened the way natural things happen, without a scheduled moment. Maya looked up from her notebook when Lily brought over a small cup of hot chocolate, not asked for, just offered. Is there marshmallows? Maya asked. 3, Lily confirmed. The good kind, not the freeze-dried ones. Maya looked at the cup, then at Lily, with an expression of deep and careful assessment. She had her father's eyes, that serious, measuring quality, but her face was rounder, softer, caught somewhere between childhood and the beginning of her own distinct self. Do you work here? Maya asked. I do. My dad comes here a lot. I know. He always orders black coffee. Maya made a face. That's disgusting. It's an acquired taste, Lily said. I don't think I want to acquire it. That's probably wise. From behind his contract, Damien said Maya in a tone that suggested he was listening and also mildly amused. I'm just talking, Maya said, with great dignity. She went back to her notebook. Lily turned to go. What's your name? Maya asked to her back. Lily turned. Lily. Maya said the name quietly to herself, like she was filing it somewhere. Then she went back to coloring. Walking home that night, Lily replayed the interaction with the vague, uneasy feeling of someone who has touched something delicate and isn't sure if they've been careful enough. There was a child in this situation now, a real one. A small, serious person who assessed the world with her father's precision and who, unlike Damien, had not chosen to be in this arrangement. She was just there, in the middle of it, the way children are always in the middle of the arrangements adults make around them. Lily had grown up with a mother who'd been in a series of arrangements that Lily had been in the middle of, and she knew exactly how that felt from the inside. She knew the way kids pay attention to things adults assume they're not tracking. She knew the way a small person can walk into a room and read the emotional temperature before they've finished taking off their shoes. She was not going to let this touch Maya. She would be careful about that, even if being careful meant being a little more distant than she might otherwise be, even if that turned out to be harder than expected. The wedding was in Connecticut. Priya's family had a house there with grounds that could accommodate a tent and 120 guests, and a string quartet that played during dinner, and what Lily suspected was a photo booth shaped like a vintage telephone box. She'd driven up with the other bridesmaids on Friday afternoon. Damien drove himself and arrived Saturday morning, which they'd agreed on. Early enough that they'd have time to establish their presence before the ceremony, late enough that he wasn't stranded in a house full of people he didn't know. He texted when he was 20 minutes out. Lily read it in the upstairs room she was sharing with Priya's cousin, where she was attempting to do something intentional with her hair and mostly just redistributing the same section of it repeatedly. 20 minutes out. You all right? She typed back. Ask me again in 20 minutes. His response came back fast. Fair enough. She put the phone down and looked at herself in the mirror. The bridesmaid dress was dusty rose, which she'd been skeptical about, but which turned out to look better than expected. Her hair was doing something that could charitably be called volume. She had on the earrings her mother had given her for her 21st birthday. Small gold circles, not flashy. She thought about Jake seeing her. She thought about Serena, almost certainly wearing something effortless. She put her shoulders back and went downstairs. He was standing by his car in the driveway when she came out, and for a second she stopped because the morning light was doing something specific to the air, and he was looking the other way, and she registered, with a small involuntary intake of breath, that Damien Cross in a suit in autumn light was the kind of sight that ambushed you if you weren't braced for it. He turned when he heard the gravel shift under her heels. He looked at her. She looked back. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. There was a beat. It was not a long beat, but it had weight. You look, he started. Don't. I was going to say you look like yourself. He paused. Which I mean as a compliment. She studied him. That's either very sweet or I look terrible. You look exactly like someone who belongs here, he said, which is what matters. She exhaled. Okay. She walked toward him. Thank you for coming. I told you I would. I know, but still. She stopped beside him. I should warn you. Priya is going to have questions. She's very thorough. She'll ask how we met. She'll want details. She'll possibly try to verify our timeline. I can handle a thorough questioner. She once cross-examined her own mother about a casserole recipe. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. I'll be careful. They walked inside. Priya found them at the pre-ceremony brunch. She was a small, bright-eyed woman with brown skin and very straight hair, and the energy of someone who is managing 12 parallel processes simultaneously and enjoying all of them. She hugged Lily with genuine warmth and then turned to look at Damien with the unabashed, interested assessment of a woman who knew what she was looking at and was going to get to the bottom of it. So, Priya said, you're the secret husband. Damien looked at Lily. Lily gave him a look that said, I told you. Not secret, Damien said. Private. Same thing. Not quite. He offered his hand. Damien Cross. Priya shook it, still studying him. I know who you are. I looked you up. She said this without embarrassment because Priya had never been embarrassed by gathering information. You're very accomplished. I do my best. How long have you two been? She made a gesture with her hand that encompassed the concept of this. Lily started to answer, but Damien smoothly said, About 8 months. Give or take when you start counting. He glanced at Lily, and his expression was natural, warm in a way that was startling because it looked real. The counting depends on when you admit what's already happening. Priya looked at Lily. Lily looked at Damien. He was watching her with the particular quality of attention she'd noticed from across the cafe dozens of times. Steady, specific, patient, and for a second she forgot they were performing anything. She said, without quite planning to, he kept coming in every Tuesday and Friday for months before he said anything. Said anything, Priya repeated. What did you say? Eventually? That her soup was better than her coffee, Damien said, and I wanted to hear about the cafe she was going to open. Priya's eyes moved between them. She had the look of someone running calculations. Then her face softened and she said, Okay, in a tone that meant she'd decided to believe it. Okay, she said again. Good. She reached out and squeezed Lily's arm. I'm glad you're not here alone. Lily felt something press at the back of her throat that she was not going to acknowledge. Go find seats, Priya told them. Ceremony starts in 40. She walked away, already talking to someone else. Damien looked at Lily. All right? You're good at this, she said quietly. So are you. He offered his arm, matter-of-factly, the way you'd offer an arm to someone walking on uneven ground. Let's go find seats. She took it. Jake Holloway appeared at the cocktail hour. Lily saw him before he saw her. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she'd rescaled him in her head over 14 months to something more manageable. He was standing by the bar with Serena at his side, thin, blonde, effortlessly put together in a way that made Lily feel, for approximately 3 seconds, the exact quality of specific inadequacy Jake had always managed to make her feel without ever saying anything cruel. Then Damien put his hand at the small of her back. It was a light touch, barely anything. He'd probably done it without thinking. A natural gesture, the kind a couple makes in a crowded room to say, "I see you, I have you." But Lily straightened. And when Jake turned and saw her, whatever he'd been prepared to find, whatever expression of brave okayness he'd been anticipating, it wasn't what he got. What he got was Lily standing in a dusty rose bridesmaid dress with her shoulders back and something easy in her posture, next to a man who looked like he belonged beside her, whose hand was at her back like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake looked at Damien. Damien was already looking at him with a calm, slightly curious expression. The face of a man who knows exactly who he's looking at and has already decided how much weight to give it, which was, apparently, very little. Jake looked back at Lily. "Hey, Lil," he said. He smiled. It was a good smile. She remembered that about him, the quality of his smile. "You look great." "Thanks." She sounded more relaxed than she felt. "You remember Priya? She put on a beautiful event." "Yeah, she really—" He glanced again at Damien. "I don't think we've met." Damien said. He shook Jake's hand briefly, without particular enthusiasm. "Good wedding." "Right, yeah." Jake's eyes moved back to Lily. "So you two are together, yes." Lily said it the same way she might say Tuesday, like it was just a fact. Jake absorbed this. Serena, at his side, smiled at Lily with something that looked like genuine warmth, which Lily found, as she'd found before, both better and harder than hostility would have been. "Well," Jake said. "Great." He nodded. "Great. It's really great to see you, Lily. You seem really good." "I am," she said simply. For a second, something moved across his face. She couldn't name it, wouldn't try. Then it passed. "We should get drinks," Serena said gently, and Jake nodded, and they drifted away. Damien didn't say anything. After a moment, Lily let out a very slow breath through her nose. "Thank you," she said quietly, to somewhere around his shoulder. "For what?" "Your hand. Just now." He was quiet for a second. "I should have asked first, if that was—" "No." She looked up at him. It was right. She looked back out at the party. It was exactly right. They danced once, near the end of the reception, when the music had slowed and the candles on the tables had burned low and the tent felt warm, and the way events feel warm when they're almost over. A particular kind of golden, passing light. Damien was not a natural dancer in the showy sense. He moved with the same quality he had in everything else, deliberately, attentively, with a focus that made her feel like she was the only person in the room he was paying attention to. Which was, she suspected, the way he paid attention to everything he decided to pay attention to. She was not special in that sense, but she felt it anyway. "You're quiet," she said. They were moving slowly. The tent hummed around them. "I was thinking." "About what?" He looked at her. He was close. Closer than she was used to. Closer than their corner cafe arrangement had ever put them. She could see the small scar on his chin, the slight darkness under his eyes that said he hadn't slept enough in a long time. "About whether tonight accomplished what you needed it to," he said. She thought about it honestly. "I think so." She paused. "I didn't think about him as much as I thought I would. That's actually something." "Good." "I mostly thought about—" She stopped. He waited. "Nothing," she said. "I'm just glad you came." He held her gaze for a second. Then he nodded, and they kept moving, and the music went on, and somewhere under the gold tent the candles burned lower, and Lily tried very hard to stay honest with herself, and mostly failed. They drove home the next morning, separately, the way they'd arrived. Lily sat in the back of a rideshare watching Connecticut give way to the city, watching the skyline build itself up out of the Sunday gray, and she thought about a hand at the small of her back, and she thought about the way he'd said the counting depends on when you admit what's already happening, and she thought about the fact that she had a problem. She had a problem, and it had started at a corner cafe table, and it had been growing, quietly, persistently, like something planted without permission, for months. And she didn't know what to do with it. Not yet. The Monday after the wedding, Lily went back to work. This was not remarkable. She went back to work every Monday. She put on her apron, tied it in the back the way she always did, left over right, double knot because the single one came loose during the lunch rush, and she refilled the sugar dispensers and wiped down the menus and did all the small, necessary things that made up the architecture of her days at Birch and Brew. Connie came in at 7 with a box of pastries from the bakery 2 blocks over and asked how the wedding was, and Lily said, "Fine. Beautiful." Priya looked incredible, and Connie nodded and disappeared into the back office, and that was that. Except that it wasn't quite. Because Lily spent the first hour of her shift replaying, involuntarily and in considerable detail, a hand at the small of her back. The specific, unhurried quality of it, the way it had landed there without asking, without announcement, like something that had always known where it belonged. She refilled a coffee cup. She took an order for eggs and wheat toast. She told herself sternly and internally to stop being ridiculous. She was mostly unsuccessful. The problem with fake things, she was discovering, was that they did not stay cleanly in their category. She had agreed to a clear arrangement: 1 wedding weekend, 1 performance, mutual benefit, clean exit. She had understood the terms. She had accepted them with her eyes open. What she had not anticipated was how poorly her feelings were at respecting contractual boundaries. It wasn't just the hand. It was everything that had accumulated over the weekend. The 2 hours in the car on Friday she'd spent talking to Priya's cousin about logistics, while her phone showed a text from Damien saying "safe drive," and the way she'd looked at those 2 words for longer than was defensible. It was the moment during the ceremony when she'd cried a little, because weddings did that to her, and he'd passed her a folded square of pocket linen without a word, and without making her feel embarrassed about it. It was the dance, the slow one near the end, and the way he'd looked at her. Not performing for anyone, not for Jake, not for Priya, just looking at her, and the thing in his face that she couldn't name and was afraid to try. She was, she thought, in some trouble. She got through Monday without incident. She got through Tuesday morning. Tuesday evening, she kept finding herself looking at the door. He came in at 7:40. Lily was behind the counter when the bell rang, and she heard the particular sound of his footsteps. She had not consciously memorized the sound of his footsteps, but apparently some part of her had done it anyway, without consulting her, and she felt something in her chest do a small traitorous thing. She picked up the coffee pot and walked over. He was already seated, coat on the chair, looking at his phone with his actual reading focus rather than the hollow kind. Better night, she thought. Or better morning, at least. "The usual?" she asked. He looked up. There was a half second, she might have imagined it, where his eyes did something they didn't normally do. A small adjustment, like a camera finding focus. "Please," he said. "And whatever you think is good tonight. I made a butternut squash thing. Goes on the specials board tomorrow, but there's some left." "Squash thing," he repeated. "It has a proper name. I just don't remember it right now." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll have the squash thing." She put in the order and came back with the coffee and did not linger at the table, which was the correct professional choice, and also cost her something she could not have articulated. She went to the other tables. She refilled things. She wrote down an order for pie. When she brought his food out, he said, "Thank you for the weekend." She set down the bowl. "You drove to Connecticut for me. I think I should be thanking you. You did something harder than I did." He looked at the food, then back at her. "How are you, actually, since?" The question was simple, and he asked it plainly, and Lily had the experience, familiar now, of his directness arriving somewhere underneath her usual deflections. "Honestly," she considered, "better than I expected. I thought seeing him would, I don't know, reopen something, but it didn't feel like that." She paused, surprised by her own words. "It felt more like closing something." He nodded slowly. "Good. It helped, having you there." She said it carefully, because she wanted it to be honest without being more than honest. "More than I expected." "I'm glad." There was a beat. A table across the cafe needed attention. She should go. "Maya asked about you," he said, just as she started to turn. She stopped. "She did?" She asked if the Lily from the cafe was going to come in again, whether she worked on Tuesdays. A pause. "I told her I thought so." Lily looked at him. He was looking back at her with an expression that was nearly neutral, but not quite. There was something underneath it, patient and deliberate, that she was starting to learn to read. "I'm always here Tuesdays," she said. "I know," he said. "So does she now." She went back to the other table. She did her job. She did not think about what that meant, mostly, for the rest of the evening. She thought about it extensively on the walk home. Maya came in the following Friday. She arrived at 6:15 before the dinner rush thickened, holding her father's hand and carrying a backpack covered in iron-on patches. A whale, a crescent moon, something that might have been a cephalopod. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket, even though it wasn't raining, and she had her father's serious eyes and her own specific energy, which was the energy of a child who has opinions about things and intends to share them on a reasonable timeline. She spotted Lily immediately. "You're here," she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. "I told you she would be," Damien said, in a tone of mild patience. "You said probably. I said I thought so, which is nearly the same." "It's not the same," Maya said, and looked at Lily for confirmation. Lily kept her face very straight. "He said he thought so, which means he wasn't certain. You were right to verify." Maya nodded with some gravity. "That's what I thought." Damien looked at Lily with an expression that said he was not going to comment on being ganged up on by his 6-year-old and a waitress. "Corner table?" Lily asked. "Please." She led them over. Maya climbed into her chair and unzipped her backpack and removed the Ocean Library book, which she opened to a page she'd clearly been at before. Lily glanced at it, a full-spread photograph of a bioluminescent deep-sea creature, glowing soft blue in absolute dark water. "Is that an anglerfish?" Lily asked. Maya looked up with sudden, total interest. "You know about anglerfish?" "I know they exist. I know they're supposedly terrifying." Maya gave Damien a look that was approximately 90% triumph. "See?" "I said they were terrifying in a factual sense," Damien said mildly. "I didn't say they were bad." "You said, and I quote," Maya said, with the diction of a child who has been listening to adults very carefully for most of her life, "objectively terrifying." Which is a compliment. Maya thought about this. "Okay," she allowed. She turned back to Lily. "They make their own light. In the deepest part of the ocean where there's no sun, they just make it themselves." She held up the book. "That's the light, right there." Lily looked at the photograph. The creature hung in the dark water, its own light surrounding it like something it had grown from the inside. "That is actually amazing," Lily said honestly. Maya nodded with deep satisfaction. "I know." Lily took their order. Black coffee for Damien, hot chocolate with exactly 3 marshmallows for Maya, and went to get it. When she came back, Maya had her notebook out and was drawing something with focused intensity. Damien was watching her draw with an expression Lily had never seen on him before, unguarded and private and full of something she didn't want to name too quickly. She set down the drinks quietly and stepped back. Damien looked up, caught her watching, and his expression shifted back into its usual measured self. But something had been there. She'd seen it. She filed it away without deciding what to do with it. Later, while Damien was settling the bill, Maya leaned across the table toward Lily with the urgent energy of a child with a question she's been holding for a while. "Do you like my dad?" she asked. Lily blinked. Yes, of course. He's a good customer." "I don't mean like that." Maya's expression was very patient. "I mean like a person." Lily looked at the child across the table. 6 years old, with her father's eyes and a library book full of creatures that made their own light, and the direct, careful attention of someone who had been paying very close attention to the world for all of those 6 years. "Yes," Lily said. "I like him as a person." Maya absorbed this. "He likes you too," she said matter-of-factly. "He's better on Tuesdays and Fridays." "Maya," Damien said from behind them without looking up from the check. "I'm just saying," Maya said serenely. Lily kept her face very carefully arranged. "It was really good to see you," she told Maya. "I know," Maya said. "We'll come back." Lily looked at Damien. He looked at her. Whatever was in his face, he had it controlled by now, but there was still something. The faintest edge of color at his jaw, The look of a man who has heard something that has landed squarely in the center of something he's been trying not to look at. "Sorry," he said, quieter than usual. "Don't be," Lily said. She meant it. November arrived with the specific blunt cold that New York does in the transition months. Not yet winter, but past fall in any meaningful sense. The trees in Riverside Park went bare in the space of about 2 weeks. The cafe's heating system, which was temperamental at the best of times, began requiring the particular combination of 2 taps and a firm push on the thermostat panel that only Lily and Connie knew about. Lily and Damien did not talk about what had happened at the wedding, and did not talk about what Maya had said at the cafe, and did not acknowledge the particular altered quality of their Tuesday and Friday evenings, which had not changed in any observable external way, but had become, somehow, heavier, denser, like the air pressure had shifted. They talked about everything else. He was expanding. She understood this in pieces over the course of those November evenings, a project he'd been building toward for 2 years, a major international push that would require significant presence in 3 cities across 2 continents. He talked about it with the particular energy he reserved for things that genuinely engaged him, which was different from his usual controlled competence. His hands moved more. He leaned forward. "It's the largest thing I've done," he said one evening, his coffee going cold beside him. "It's the kind of move that either redefines what the company is, or—" He stopped. "Or," Lily prompted, "or it overextends. It bets everything on a single direction." He looked at her. "I don't usually do that. I don't usually take positions I can't hedge. But you're considering it." "I've been considering it for 2 years. That's why it's time to stop considering and decide." He turned the coffee cup. "The team I've built can handle the day-to-day. Ross, he's my old partner. I told you about him. He's been consulting again. He thinks I should do it." "What do you think?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think it's the right move, professionally." He paused. "The complication is that it's not a desk-based operation. There would be travel. Real presence required on the ground in both locations." "How much travel?" 6 months, possibly 8. He looked out the window. "With Maya in school, that's complicated." "What would you do?" "My sister is in the city. She's offered before. Maya loves her." He still had the look of a man working through something that hurt around the edges. "It's not ideal. She's been moved around enough." Lily thought about what she knew of Maya. The way she'd climbed into that cafe chair like she owned it, confident and matter-of-fact. The way she'd shown Lily the anglerfish with the pride of someone sharing a discovery they thought should be shared. The ocean library book she carried everywhere like a portable home. "She seems sturdy," Lily said carefully. "She is." He said it immediately, with conviction, and then with a shadow. "She works hard at being sturdy." "That's not quite the same thing." Lily looked at him. He was looking at the window, at the street where the November rain made the pavement gleam, and she thought, not for the first time, but more clearly now, about what it took to be this man, to have built everything he'd built, to be standing at the edge of this enormous professional leap, and to have the thing that stopped him be not risk or failure or money, but a 7-year-old girl with an ocean book and 3 marshmallows in her hot chocolate. "You're a good dad," she said. He turned and looked at her, and the expression on his face was complicated in a way she didn't have a word for. Not pleased, not dismissive. Something between those, something that looked like it had been sitting unexamined for a long time and wasn't used to being seen. "I try," he said. "No," she said. "You are." He held her gaze for a second. Then he looked back at the window. "The decision's not made yet," he said, in the voice that meant he was pulling himself back behind the line he'd apparently decided on. "I know," she said. She carried the coffee cups back to the counter, and she stood for a moment at the sink, and she thought, with uncomfortable clarity, "I'm not going to be able to keep doing this for much longer without telling the truth." She didn't know what the truth was exactly. She was working on it. It was Priya who said it out loud first. She came to the city for a Thursday, a work trip that turned into dinner, and she and Lily sat in a booth at a Thai place in the East Village and ate too much and drank a sufficient quantity of white wine and debriefed the wedding with the particular pleasure of 2 people who had been friends long enough to be honest about everything. "He looked at you," Priya said. Lily had been waiting for this. "He was there as my date. That's generally what dates do." "Not like that." Priya pointed at her with a spring roll. Not the way he looked at you when you didn't know he was looking. That's a different thing. She ate part of the spring roll. And you looked at him the same way. Priya. I'm not making it up, Lily. I see things. I am literally professionally trained to observe social dynamics. She was a therapist. This was technically true. And what I observed was two people pretending they weren't having feelings. Lily was quiet. How long? Priya said, more gently now. Lily looked at her wine. I don't know, months. Maybe longer. She exhaled. It's complicated. Because he's wealthy? Because he's everything. She made a gesture that was supposed to encompass Damien Cross and his entire existence. He's building something huge. He's got a daughter. He had a whole life before I came into it, and he's going to have a whole life after. I'm a waitress with a business plan in a notebook, Priya. At some point, that gap matters. That gap, Priya said slowly and deliberately, is a story you're telling yourself about your own value. And I say that as someone who loves you and also has a graduate degree in how humans lie to themselves. Lily opened her mouth. I'm not saying it's easy, Priya said. I'm saying the gap you're worried about is not the gap that's actually there. The gap that's actually there is that you're both terrified, and neither of you is saying anything. Lily stared at her wine. She thought about Damien looking at her across the cafe, about Maya's matter-of-fact voice saying he's better on Tuesdays and Fridays, about the way he'd said the counting depends on when you admit what's already happening, and she'd felt it in her chest like a struck chord. What if I'm wrong? She said quietly. What if I say something and I'm wrong and I lose the whatever this is, what it already is? What if you don't, Priya said, and you lose it anyway because you waited too long? Lily didn't answer that. She didn't have an answer. She walked home alone that night, 3 blocks in the cold, and she thought about the deal they had made in the empty cafe. 1 night, 1 wedding, and how little it had stayed in its lane. She thought about the way things that start as fiction sometimes have the inconvenient quality of being more honest than you intended. She went home and she did not make any decisions, and she told herself that was fine, that was practical, that some things needed to settle on their own timeline. What she didn't say, even to herself, even quietly, was what she was afraid of. She was afraid that he was right, that the counting did depend on when you admitted what was happening, and that she had been counting for a long time. He asked her to dinner again in the 3rd week of November. Not a logistics dinner, not a debrief. Just, are you free Saturday? I thought we could get dinner. Sent by text at 10:15 on a Thursday morning, which she knew meant he'd been sitting on it for a while because Damien Cross was not a spontaneous texter. She wrote back, yes. And then, because honesty was something she was practicing, I'd like that. His response came back in less than a minute. Good, I know a place. I'll pick you up at 7. She stood in her kitchen holding her phone and she smiled at it, which was embarrassing, and she didn't stop. He picked her up at 7 exactly. He drove them to a restaurant in Brooklyn that she never would have found on her own. Small, cash only, run by a Taiwanese family who'd been in the space for 30 years. The food arrived without menus, course by course, and every single thing on the table was the best version of itself. Lily forgot to be anxious. She forgot to track the gap or manage the narrative. She just ate, and they talked. They talked about his expansion project. He'd made the decision, he told her. He was moving forward. There was something settled in his face when he said it, resolved. The way a man looks when he has stopped arguing with himself. He would build the infrastructure to manage his absence. Maya would stay with his sister during the weeks he was traveling, and he would come back every 3 weeks without fail. Non-negotiable. She made me promise, he said, before I'd even told her the whole plan. She looked at me and said, Daddy, you have to come back, okay? Every 3 weeks. He shook his head, like she'd already done the research. She probably had, Lily said. She's very thorough. I have no idea where she gets it. Lily looked at him across the table. I genuinely cannot imagine. He met her eyes, and there it was. The thing they'd been not doing for weeks, the almost smile that became a real one, both of them at the same time, and the space between them at that table felt different from the space at the cafe. Smaller, more deliberate. I wanted to tell you, he said after a moment, about the decision, before I told anyone else. She held that. Why? He was quiet for a second. Not the kind of quiet that meant he didn't have an answer. The kind that meant he was deciding how honest to be. Because you're the person I wanted to tell. Lily looked at him. He was looking back, steady and careful, and open in the specific way he was only open when he'd decided to be, which was not often, but was, when it happened, absolute. Damien, she said, you don't have to say anything. I know. She turned her water glass. I just want to be careful about what I say and what I mean. I know. I don't know how to do this with you. It's not a category I have a lot of experience in. She paused. You're kind of a lot. Something flickered in his face. I've been told. I don't mean that badly. She looked at him directly. I mean, you're a lot of things at once. You're careful and you're complicated, and you take up space in a very quiet way, and I've been... She stopped, started again. I've been trying to be practical about what this is. Have you been successful? She exhaled a short breath. Not particularly. He was very still across the table. Neither have I, he said. The restaurant was warm and small around them. The food sat between them, half-finished, forgotten. Somewhere behind them a family was celebrating something, their voices running warm and indistinct. Lily said carefully, I don't want to be something that complicates your life. The expansion, Maya, everything you're building. I'm not going to be the thing that gets in the way of that. Who said you'd be in the way? People like me, she said quietly, have a way of not fitting into lives like yours. The sentence landed and she felt him receive it, felt the slight shift in his posture, the way he leaned forward a degree, his elbows coming to the table. People like you, he repeated, and his voice was very level. Explain that. You know what I mean. I'd like to hear you say it. She looked at him. He was watching her with that full, direct attention that she'd always found difficult to hold because it left no room for comfortable vagueness. I don't come from money. I don't have a network or a position or any of the infrastructure that makes sense alongside what you have. I'm working a job that pays me by the hour. My big ambition is a cafe. She said it evenly, not self-pityingly, just as fact. That's not a match. You're describing a socioeconomic bracket, he said, not a person. They're not entirely separate things. They're not the same thing either. He was quiet for a second. You think I don't know who you are? I've been watching you work for almost a year. I've watched you treat every person who walks into that cafe like they matter. I've eaten your food. I've watched you be kind to my daughter. I've watched you be honest when honesty was harder than the alternative. He paused. I'm not confused about who you are. I'm not confused about what you're worth. The gap you're worried about is one you invented. Lily looked at him. Priya said something like that. She's right. She usually is. It's insufferable. Lily exhaled. Damien, I need to be careful. I'm not going to be the thing you regret. You're not, he said. You can't know that. I know enough. He said it the same way he'd said it in the rain on West 74th Street that first night, offering to come to the wedding. I know enough. And she thought about all the ways he had in fact known, had read her correctly and weighted correctly and shown up correctly and never once pretended to be something he wasn't. She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at the table. I'm scared, she said finally. It came out smaller than she intended. More honest. So am I, he said. She looked up. He met her eyes. There was no performance in his face, no reassurance, no charm, just the actual truth of it, a man who knew exactly what he was saying and had decided to say it. I haven't wanted something this specific in a long time, he said. That's terrifying in a way that's different from other kinds of risk. Lily was quiet for a second. Because you can't hedge it. He almost smiled. Because I can't hedge it. She looked at him across the small table in the warm Brooklyn restaurant, and she thought, here is a person who is telling you the truth. Here is a person who does not say things he doesn't mean. Here is a person who showed up in the rain and held an umbrella over you for 12 blocks and passed you a pocket square at a wedding without making you feel embarrassed about needing it. She said, okay. He waited. Okay, she said again. I'm not going to be practical about this anymore. I'm just going to... She shook her head slightly. See what it is. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. That's all I'm asking. They finished dinner. They walked out into the Brooklyn night, which was cold and clear, the sky a particular shade of city dark that wasn't quite black. He drove her back to her apartment, and they sat in the car for 20 minutes after he'd parked, talking about nothing in particular. Maya's anglerfish campaign, Connie's temperamental heating system, a book he'd been reading, and neither of them said anything about what they'd said in the restaurant, but they didn't need to. When she got out of the car, he got out too, walked her to the door the way he'd done after that first rain walk, and at the door he stopped. She turned. He looked at her for a second. Then he reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face, just that, just a small deliberate gesture, and said, "Get inside, it's cold." She went. She stood in her hallway, and she pressed her back against the closed door, and she stared at the ceiling, and she breathed. She acknowledged to the ceiling, completely done pretending this was something other than what it was. She just had no idea yet how much that was going to cost her. December came in, the way December always comes to New York. Not gently, not with ceremony, but with a kind of blunt insistence, as if the city had simply decided the softer months were over and everyone needed to adjust accordingly. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in 4 days. The cafe's heating system gave out entirely on a Wednesday, and Connie had to call a repairman who took 3 hours and charged her $400 and fixed it by replacing a part that cost $11. Lily wore an extra layer under her apron for a week before the heat settled back into something reliable. None of this was remarkable. What was remarkable was the way December felt different from the inside, warmer somehow, in spite of the cold. Fuller. The way a room feels different when there is someone in it you are glad to see. She and Damien did not put a name on what they were. This was partly by unspoken agreement and partly because naming things can make them brittle, and both of them knew enough about things going wrong to be careful with the ones going right. But the shape of it changed. He texted more. Not constantly, not in the flooding way of someone who needed constant contact, but with the measured, purposeful frequency of a man who had decided that contact was something he wanted. She texted back. She found herself doing it with her coat still on when she got home from work, sitting on the arm of her couch, typing and reading and sometimes laughing at her phone screen in the way that people do when they're not thinking about how they look. He took her places. Not big, declarative places. Not the kind of dinner that announces itself. A Saturday morning at a bookstore in the village where he bought Maya 3 books about ocean biology, and Lily found a cookbook she'd been looking for 2 years, and he bought it before she could say she'd get it herself. An afternoon in Riverside Park where Maya ran ahead of them on the path, and they walked side by side with their hands sometimes close enough that their knuckles brushed, and neither of them moved away. A Sunday evening at his apartment where Lily made dinner for the 3 of them. A proper dinner, something with braised short ribs and a salad with fennel that Maya ate around carefully and then admitted tasted better than it looked, which Lily took as high praise from someone who had strong opinions about food texture. The apartment was on the Upper West Side, the 16th floor, with windows that looked out over the park. It was the kind of apartment that could have been cold. Too much space, too many clean lines. But it wasn't, because Maya had annexed significant portions of it. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator, the kind of drawings that 6-year-olds make with complete confidence in their artistic vision. There was a plastic container of sea creatures on the coffee table and a cardboard model of an ocean floor diorama that was clearly a work in progress on the dining room table. There was a small bookshelf in the living room that held children's books mixed in with Damien's investment texts in the particular unselfconscious disorder of a home where a child has been given permission to exist fully in the shared space. Lily stood in his kitchen that Sunday evening and chopped onions and thought, "This feels like something." She was trying to be honest about things. Priya had told her to be honest. Damien had told her the same thing, essentially, that night in Brooklyn. She was practicing. This felt like something. It felt like the beginning of a life she hadn't known she was allowed to want. She was terrified of how much she meant that. Maya came into the kitchen while the onions were softening in the pan and climbed onto a stool at the counter and watched Lily cook with the focused, evaluative attention of a future scientist examining data. She asked questions. Why do onions smell like that? What does braised mean? Why do you cut things that small instead of big? Lily answered all of them, seriously, without the condensing register adults sometimes default to with children, because she remembered being a child who asked questions and being talked to like her questions were inconvenient, and she wasn't going to do that. "My dad can't cook," Maya said, at some point, conversationally, without cruelty. He makes three things: pasta, eggs, and cereal. Cereal isn't cooking, Lily pointed out. I know. He knows too. He just counts it anyway. From the living room, without looking up from the contract he was reading, he was always reading something, Damien said, I can hear you. We know, Maya said serenely. Lily kept her face very controlled. He's better at other things, Maya added, with the generous fairness of someone keeping a balanced accounting. He's very good at math, and he always knows when I'm lying, which is actually pretty annoying. That does sound annoying, Lily agreed. And he reads to me every night, even when he's tired. Maya picked up one of the sea creature toys she'd carried in from the other room, an orca, and turned it in her fingers. He never skips pages. Some dads skip pages. How do you know that? Cleo at school said so. She set the orca down. Her dad skips whole chapters sometimes and pretends he didn't. She looked at Lily with an expression of measured judgment. That's dishonest. It is, Lily agreed. Maya nodded. Then, do you have a dad? Lily stirred the onions. I did. He passed away when I was 15. Maya was quiet for a second, thinking this through. That was a long time ago, she said carefully, working out the math. 15 years, almost. Do you still miss him? Lily looked at the pan. Yeah, in a kind of background way, like it doesn't hurt the same way it did, but it's still there. Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. I think that's probably normal, she said. Lily looked at her. I think you're probably right. Maya picked up the orca again. My mom is in Chicago, she said, in the same tone she'd used to explain about Cleo's dad. Matter of fact. The voice of someone who has long since made peace with a fact, or at least decided to act like it. She's there most of the time. I see her for visits. Do you like Chicago? It's fine. It's cold. A pause. She has a new apartment. It has a view of the lake. That's pretty. Yeah. Maya set the orca down again. Then she looked at Lily directly, with the full force of those gray eyes that were her father's eyes in a smaller, softer face. I like it when you're here, she said. It was simple. Offered plainly, without artifice, the way children say things before they learn to be guarded about them. Lily felt it go straight through her defenses and land somewhere unprotected. I like being here, she said. She meant it completely. Maya seemed to register this, filed it in whatever internal system she used for data that mattered, and then slid off the stool and went back to the living room, sea creature in hand, narrating something quietly to herself. Lily turned back to the pan. She stirred the onions that didn't need stirring. She stood in Damien Cross's kitchen in the 16th floor apartment while the park spread out dark and silver beyond the windows, and she felt something that was too large and too frightening to name directly, so she didn't try. She just cooked. She was good at that, at least. That she knew how to do. He kissed her for the first time on a Tuesday evening in early December. Not at the cafe, after the cafe, at the corner where he had taken to walking her, the corner of her street, where they had stood once before in October rain. This time there was no rain. There was just cold, clear air, and the city doing its nighttime thing around them, and Lily had been talking about something small, a customer who'd left a sticky note on the table instead of a tip, a post-it that said you were wonderful in loopy handwriting, and she'd been saying she'd rather have the wonderful than a bad tip anyway, and she'd looked up at Damien to see what he thought, and he was looking at her with an expression that had stopped being neutral sometime in the previous 60 seconds. She stopped talking. He said, Lily. She said, okay. He kissed her once, briefly, and it was not the sweeping movie kind. It was the kind that is careful because it matters, the kind where someone is paying full attention to what they're doing and to you. And then he pulled back a few inches and looked at her to see, and what he saw must have been adequate because something in his face changed, not dramatically but definitively, the way a room changes when you turn on a light. She said, into the small remaining distance between them, You took a long time. I was being careful, he said. I know. She looked up at him. Me too. He walked her to her door. He left. She went inside and stood in her hallway with her coat on and her keys in her hand, and she was smiling, and she was also very quietly afraid. Not of him, not of what was between them, of how much it had already come to matter, of how thoroughly she had failed at being practical, of the voice in the back of her mind that sounded uncomfortably like her younger self, the one who had watched her mother's arrangements fall apart one by one and had learned early and quietly that the people who love things hardest are the people who lose them loudest. She took her coat off. She put the keys on the hook. She went to bed, and she lay in the dark and she thought, "You are already in this. You have been in this for a while. The question is not whether to be careful. The question is whether careful is even possible anymore." She didn't have an answer. She slept badly and woke up and went back to work and did not think about it, or tried not to, and mostly she succeeded, except for the parts where she didn't. Christmas approached with the particular retail violence it brings to Manhattan, the lights and the crowds and the specific kind of cold that smelled like pretzels and exhaust and pine. Birch and Brew put up a small tree in the corner that Connie decorated with mismatched ornaments collected from estate sales, which was somehow exactly right. Lily made a spiced apple cider that went on the specials board and sold out every day for 3 weeks. She and Damien had settled into something that didn't have a clean category yet, but felt more solid than anything she'd had in recent memory. He came in on Tuesdays and Fridays still, but those weren't just cafe evenings anymore. They were the fixed points of something larger that moved around them. Dinners, park walks, Sunday afternoons at his apartment with Maya. A Saturday she'd spent helping him pick out Christmas gifts for his sister's kids, wandering a toy store for an hour while he consulted her with the specific skeptical energy of a man who respected her opinion but wasn't going to pretend he thought every suggestion was equally valid. "She's 9, he said, holding up a craft set. "Is this too young?" "Depends on the 9-year-old. What's she into?" "Building things. She took apart her mother's blender." "Engineering kit, not crafts." Lily steered them down another aisle. "There, that one." He looked at the box, looked at her. "How do you know this?" "I was a kid once. I paid attention." He bought 3 of them, one for his niece, apparently deciding to hedge on the logic that if it was right, more was better. Lily found this extremely Damien of him and did not say so. Maya's gift was already handled. He'd ordered it weeks ago. A professional-grade microscope scaled for a child, but not condescending about it, along with a set of water sample slides and a book on marine microorganisms. He told Lily about it with the particular restrained pride of a parent who knows they've found exactly the right thing. She told him it was perfect, and it was. "She's going to be a scientist," Lily said, as they left the toy store. "She's going to be whatever she decides to be," he said, which was so exactly the right answer that she felt something warm move through her chest. She looked at him, walking beside her in the holiday-crowded street, and she thought, "I love this person." The thought arrived with the quiet certainty of something that had been true for a while and had simply now decided to be acknowledged. Not a revelation. More like a window clearing. You could see through it all along, you just couldn't see it clearly. She did not say this. She filed it away carefully, in the place where she kept the things that mattered too much to say too quickly, and she kept walking, and the city went on around them, loud and lit and indifferent to the size of what was happening inside her. Thus, the news about the expansion came officially in the second week of January. Damien told her on a Friday evening, staying later at the cafe than usual, the place empty except for them and Connie's voice from the back singing along with something on the radio. "It's moving faster than projected," he said. His voice was steady, which meant he'd had time to process it already. "The Singapore team pulled the timeline up by 6 weeks. I'll need to be there for the initial operational phase. March through, probably September." 6 months. She absorbed this. "That's 6 months," she said. "Yes." "But you're coming back every 3 weeks, like you said." "Every 3 weeks, non-negotiable. I told the Singapore team that before I signed anything." He looked at her directly. "I told you that." "I know." She looked at her hands on the table. "I'm not doubting you. I'm just recalibrating." "Lily." She looked up. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "Between us. I need you to hear that." "I hear it." She meant it. She did hear it. But she was also, underneath the hearing, doing the math. 6 months of a relationship conducted across 12 time zones, of being the person at home while he built an empire, of watching Maya live with his sister and doing nothing because there was nothing she could do, of being fundamentally the person waiting. She knew that person. She had watched her mother be that person. She knew what happened to that person. "You're already worried about things I haven't given you reason to worry about," he said. She looked at him. He was right. He was also, occasionally, very irritating in how right he could be. "I'm not worried," she said, which was a lie. "You are," he said, "and it's okay. But I need you to tell me what you're actually thinking, not the version you're managing." She exhaled. "I'm thinking about the distance, about what that does to things." She paused. "I'm thinking about being the person who's here while you're there. I'm not very good at being stationary while someone I care about is somewhere else." "What happened before? When someone was somewhere else?" She didn't want to get into it. She did it anyway because he'd asked directly, and she'd promised herself she was done managing. "My dad, when he was sick, he traveled for treatment. Different cities. I was 15 and I stayed home with my mom and we waited." She turned her water glass. "He didn't come back." A silence. Outside the cafe, a cab horn went off and then stopped. "That's not the same situation," Damien said quietly. "I know." She looked at him. "It lives in the same neighborhood, emotionally. That's what I'm telling you." He held her gaze. "I'm coming back," he said. It was not a platitude. It was the way he said other things he meant. Flat and certain, with no decoration. "Every 3 weeks, and then after September, I'm back for good. That's the plan." "Plans change." "Some do." A pause. "Mine don't." She wanted to believe that completely. She believed it about 80%, which was better than she'd expected, better than she usually managed with things that mattered. She took that as progress. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'm not going to make this into something it isn't. You're doing what you need to do. I'll be here." She looked at him. "That's honest." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. It was a simple gesture, and it wasn't charged or romantic in any performed way. It was just the deliberate act of someone choosing to close physical space, to be solid in a moment where things were uncertain. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a while. Connie's radio played on in the back. The cafe held them, warm and familiar, and neither of them said anything else, because sometimes what there is to say has already been said, and the remaining thing is just to stay. February was the last full month before the March departure date, and it had the quality of things that are ending without being over, bittersweet in the specific way of lasts that you can see coming. Lily knew this month and tried not to treat it like a countdown, because treating it like a countdown would make it smaller. She went to work. She made the cafe specials. She tested new recipes in her apartment on Sunday mornings and brought whatever was good to Damien's on the evenings when she went over for dinner. Maya, who had been told about Singapore in careful, honest terms. "Daddy has to go help build something important, and he'll be back every 3 weeks without fail, and you'll be with Aunt Rachel, and I'll video call you every single night," had reacted with the precise combination of sadness, practicality, and trust that she seemed to apply to everything. She'd cried once, briefly, and Lily had been there for it, and it had been one of the harder things Lily had sat through because there was nothing to fix, and fixing things was her instinct. After the brief cry, Maya had wiped her face with her sleeve and said, "Can we get a fish tank? I want to study the fish while he's gone." Damien had said yes before the sentence was finished. They got the fish tank on a Saturday in mid-February. Lily came with them to the aquarium store, which was a place she had not been in probably 20 years, and which turned out to be, for an aquarium store, genuinely interesting. Long rows of lit tanks, all manner of things swimming in their quiet, oblivious way, and Maya moving between them with her nose practically against the glass. She picked 2 small clownfish and a snail, which she named Vesper, Marigold, and Captain Hooks respectively. When asked why Captain Hooks for a snail, she said patiently that snails moved slowly like someone dragging a hook, which made a reasonable amount of sense. They set the tank up on Maya's dresser that evening, the 3 of them crowded into her room. It was a small tank, the light inside it casting a soft blue across the walls. Vesper and Marigold circled each other with the indifferent grace of fish adjusting to new territory. Captain Hooks moved with commitment along the glass. Maya sat cross-legged on her bed watching them, satisfied, her ocean library book open across her knees out of habit rather than any immediate intention to read. Lily was crouched, adjusting the tank heater, and when she sat back she found Damien watching her from the doorway with an expression she caught before he could arrange it. It was the same expression she'd seen briefly at the cafe, months ago, unguarded, private, the look of a man who is watching something that matters to him in a way he has not yet fully processed. And now she had context for it that she hadn't had then, and the context made her chest ache in a way that was both uncomfortable and something she wouldn't have traded. She looked back at him. He didn't look away. He just held her gaze in his direct, decided way, and what was in his face said, "This. This is the thing. This right here." Maya said from the bed, not looking up, "Marigold is going to be the dominant one. She has the energy." "You can tell that in 10 minutes?" Lily asked, looking away from Damien. "I'm a scientist," Maya said. "I observe things." "She does," Damien confirmed from the doorway. "It's occasionally inconvenient." "Only for people who don't want to be observed," Maya said. Lily laughed. Maya smiled at her notebook and went back to reading. And Damien stood in the doorway of his daughter's room while the small tank lit the space blue and warm, and he looked like a man who had, after a long time in transit, found the place he was going. Lily saw this. She held it carefully, like something that could still break. They had the argument in the last week of February, which was not what she'd planned, but arguments rarely are. It started small. He was at the cafe on a Friday, later than usual, clearly exhausted in the particular way of someone who has been managing too many simultaneous processes. She'd brought over his coffee and he'd been on his phone, which wasn't unusual, but he'd held up a hand to her, not rudely, but automatically, the way someone does when they're in the middle of something and can't break away. She went back to the other tables. She came back 20 minutes later and he was still on the phone. The coffee was cold. She replaced it without saying anything. He held up the hand again. She went back behind the counter. By the time the cafe closed and he was finally off the phone, Lily had been carrying something tightly for 40 minutes, and she had not done a particularly good job of processing it. He came up to the counter, looking wrung out, and said, "Sorry about that. Singapore team." "It's fine," she said. Her voice was not quite right. He heard it. He always heard things. "What is it?" "Nothing. You were busy." "Lily." She looked at him across the counter. "I know you're busy. I understand what the next few months are going to be like. I do." She paused. It was 40 minutes. And you held up your hand like I was..." She stopped. "Like you were what?" he asked carefully. "Like I was background," she said. "Like I was something to manage while you handled the actual things." He was quiet for a second. In his face, she could see him taking this in without immediately defending himself, which was one of the things about him that could be maddening and also deeply decent. "You're right," he said. She blinked. "What?" "You're right. It was dismissive. I was in the middle of something difficult and I defaulted to controlling the environment. I do that." He said it without drama. "It's a bad habit." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me I'm being too sensitive." "No," he said. "You're not being too sensitive. I was rude." She stood there with the disarmed quality of someone who had prepared for a different response. "Okay," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. "Okay," she said again. They stood in the empty cafe. She exhaled slowly. "I hate that I'm going to miss you," she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it, too honest, too direct, and she watched it land on him. "I hate that I've gotten used to this, and now the schedule is going to change, and I'm going to be here, and you're going to be..." "Oh, I know," he said, "and I know that's not... I'm not asking you not to go. I wouldn't do that." "I know. I just wanted to say it." She met his eyes. "That I'm going to miss you, so that it's been said." He came around the counter, which he'd never done before in 9 months of cafe visits, and he stood on her side of it, which made everything feel different immediately. And he put his hands on either side of her face, and he looked at her with the full, direct, unhedged version of his attention. "I'm going to miss you in a way that's going to make the work difficult," he said. "Which is new for me. Work has never been difficult because of a person before." She looked up at him. Her eyes were doing something inconvenient. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I mean it." "I know you do. That's why." She put her hands over his briefly, and then stepped back and collected herself because she was at work, technically, and she had some dignity to maintain. March 2nd. March 2nd, he confirmed. It was the departure date. "You'll call when you land." "Yes." "Every 3 weeks." "Every 3 weeks?" He looked at her steadily. "Nothing about this is changing, just the geography." She nodded. She believed him. She was also, underneath the belief, more scared than she'd admitted to anyone, including herself, because she understood now, with complete clarity, what she stood to lose if the geography proved to be more than they could hold across. She had been here before, waiting, and having the waiting end wrong. She was not the same person she'd been at 15, or 25, or even 29. She was 30, and she was more honest about things, and she knew what she wanted, and she'd said so. But some fears don't update the way logic does. Some fears live in the body, in the specific memory of loss, and they don't really care how much you've grown. She would manage them. She was good at managing. It was what she did. She just hoped, this time, that managing wouldn't cost her everything she'd stopped managing enough to want. He left on a Sunday morning, early, before the city was fully awake. Lily did not go to the airport. They'd talked about it, and both agreed that airports were for reunions, not departures, and that goodbyes in departure halls had an officialness that neither of them wanted to perform. She came to his apartment the night before. Maya was staying with Rachel that night, a concession to the reality that Damien needed to finish packing and that transition nights were easier for Maya when there was something to do, and Rachel had promised a movie and too much popcorn. Maya had hugged Lily at pickup with her full, unhesitating body, the way children hug when they mean it without thinking about it, her arms around Lily's waist and her face pressed briefly against her coat. "Take care of Vesper and Marigold," Maya said, into Lily's coat. "I will," Lily said. "Captain Hooks, too." "Captain Hooks doesn't need much care. He's self-sufficient." "I believe it." Maya pulled back and looked at her with those serious gray eyes. "You'll still be here when he gets back," she said. Not a question. Something between a statement and a request. Lily felt the question inside the not question, and she answered both of them. "I'll still be here," she said. Maya nodded once, satisfied with the data, and went to Rachel's car. Lily had dinner with Damien that evening. Takeout, because neither of them had the bandwidth for cooking, eaten at his dining room table with the half-packed suitcases visible through the bedroom door. They talked. Not about the departure. About Maya. About the fish tank. About a book he'd been reading. About the squash recipe she'd been developing for the cafe specials. They talked the way people talk when they're trying to stay in the present of something rather than the approaching edge of it. At some point, the food was finished and the conversation went quiet, and they sat in the kitchen in the particular silence of a night that was almost over. "Tell me something," Lily said. He looked at her. "Something you haven't said, whatever you're sitting on." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm afraid I'll get there and the work will take over," he said. "It's done it before. It's what I built my life around for a long time before Maya. Work was the thing I was always sure of." He looked at the table. "I'm afraid I'll get there and the distance and the work will fill everything up, and I'll lose track of—" He stopped. "Of this," she supplied. "Yes." She looked at him. "You know what I think?" "Tell me." "I think you're the most intentional person I've ever met. I think you don't lose track of the things you've decided matter." She held his gaze. "I think you'll be careful, because that's who you are." He looked at her for a long moment. "I needed to hear that," he said, which was not something he said often, and the honesty of it went straight through her. "I know," she said. She left at 11. He walked her down to the lobby. Not to the street, just to the lobby, because the elevator had that particular intimacy of small spaces and endings, and they stood in the marble foyer with its too bright overhead light, while the night doorman conspicuously looked at his desk. He held her for a long moment. She let herself be held, which was something she was still learning, the not managing, the staying still inside someone's arms without planning the exit. "March 2nd, she said into his coat. "I'll call when I land." She pulled back, looked at him. "Go do the thing," she said. "I'll be here." She walked out into the February dark, and she did not cry until she was half a block away, and then she cried briefly and practically, the way she did most things, and she kept walking. She was still here. She would keep being here. She was just also, in the bone-deep private dark of herself, beginning to do the math that she didn't want to do. The calculation she had been running since November, that had been running louder since January, that she had been trying to silence with logic and trust, and the memory of his hands on her face in the empty cafe. The math that said, he is going somewhere you cannot follow. He is going somewhere that will demand everything of him. And the kindest thing you could do, for him, for Maya, for the future he is trying to build, might be the very thing that breaks you. She pushed it down. She went home. She went to sleep. She would not listen to that math yet. Not yet. He called when he landed. It was 3:17 in the afternoon New York time, which meant it was past 3 in the morning in Singapore, and he'd been traveling for over 20 hours. And his voice on the phone had the flattened, slightly disembodied quality of someone who had been awake too long and was running on the last reserves of functional competence. She was behind the counter at Birch and Brew when the call came in, and she stepped into the back hallway where the coats hung and the cleaning supplies lived and held the phone to her ear and listened to him say he'd landed. The hotel was fine. He was going to sleep for 6 hours and then go directly to the office. 6 hours, she said. Maybe 5. Damien, I'll sleep on the weekend. It's Monday. Then I'll sleep next Monday. A pause, and through the exhaustion she could hear something that was almost a smile. I'm fine. How was your Tuesday? It's Sunday. How was your Sunday? Quiet. She leaned against the wall. Maya texted me a picture of Captain Hooks. He's moved to the front of the tank. She says he's asserting dominance. A real sound this time, low and warm, the kind of laugh that comes out when someone is too tired to hold it back. Of course he is. Another pause. Lily. Yeah. I'll call Wednesday, our Wednesday. Your Tuesday night. I know you will. Get back to work. You go to sleep. I will. A beat of quiet across 12 time zones. I'm glad you picked up. I always pick up, she said. She went back to the cafe. She made coffee and took orders and split the last piece of pie with Connie at closing time, and she was fine. She was completely fine. She was going to be fine. But the first 3 weeks were manageable. He called on schedule, Tuesday nights her time, Wednesday mornings his, and they talked for 30 to 40 minutes, which was not nothing, but was also not dinner at a small Brooklyn restaurant, or walking in Riverside Park, or standing in his kitchen while Maya explained the social hierarchy of clownfish. The calls had a specific texture, warm but slightly effortful, 2 people working to maintain the dimensions of something across a medium that flattens everything. He told her about Singapore, not the glamorous version, the actual version, the humidity that hit like a wall the moment you left any air-conditioned space, the particular kind of 18-hour workday that left your brain feeling scraped, the team he was building which was good, but had the growing pains of any new configuration of people who needed to learn to trust each other under pressure. He told her about a restaurant near the office where he'd eaten alone 3 times because it was the only place within walking distance that didn't require a reservation, and the noodles were very good, and he was starting to become the kind of regular you become when you're building a life somewhere temporary. She told him about the cafe, about the new spring menu she was helping Connie develop, about the customer who came in every Thursday and always ordered decaf, and then complained it wasn't strong enough, and how she'd started giving him regular without telling him. And he now said it was much improved. About her notebooks and the cafe plans, the business models she'd been adding to on and off, the sketches of the space she imagined. Tell me about the space, he said one Tuesday. She pulled the notebook from the shelf beside her bed. She was in her apartment, sitting cross-legged against the headboard, and the city outside her window was doing its late-night quiet thing, the sound of traffic thinned to something almost peaceful. Ground floor, she said. Neighborhood space, not a destination place. You should be able to walk in without feeling like you need to have made an effort. She turned a page. Big windows. I want natural light to be the main thing, the way good light feels like it's doing you a favor. Counter along one wall where people can sit and work if they want. Tables in the middle that are close enough to feel convivial, but not so close that you're in someone's conversation. And the kitchen? Open, partially. I want people to be able to see some of it, not performatively. Not a show kitchen, just enough that you know real food is being made by a real person. He was quiet for a moment. What would you serve? She'd thought about this for years. Breakfast and lunch? Maybe early dinner on weekends? The kind of food that tastes like someone made it for you specifically. Nothing on the menu that requires a glossary. She paused. Hot sauce that I make in-house. Obviously. The coffee matters, but it's not the whole identity. Food is the identity. What's the name? She paused. It was a page she'd filled in and crossed out and filled in again over the years. I don't know yet. I know what it should feel like when you say it. Warm, short, like something you'd already heard before. He was quiet in the particular way that meant he was thinking about it seriously, not filling space. You'll know it when you find it, he said. Probably. Have you talked to anyone about the licensing process? I looked into it. Lily. His voice was measured. Have you actually talked to anyone, or have you looked at the city website for 40 minutes and closed the tab? She opened her mouth, closed it. The second one. There's a woman named Clara Reyes. She works with new food service businesses on the licensing and zoning side. My assistant can send you her contact. You don't have to. I want to. Let my assistant send it. She was quiet for a second. You're doing the thing, she said. What thing? The thing where you solve problems I haven't asked you to solve. You mentioned it. That counts as asking. It really doesn't. Lily, his voice was patient and slightly exasperated in equal measure. Let me send you the contact. She looked at her notebook, at the crossed-out names and the sketched floor plan and the years of accumulated wanting, sitting in a spiral notebook on a shelf. Okay, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's information. I might do nothing with it. You won't, he said. He was right. She called Clara Reyes the following week and spent 90 minutes on the phone getting a clearer picture of what building a food service business in New York actually required. It was complicated and expensive, and the timeline was longer than she'd hoped. But Clara had the efficient energy of someone who made complicated things navigable. And by the end of the call, Lily had a list of specific next steps, and the feeling, unfamiliar and somewhat alarming, that the thing she'd been dreaming about for 6 years had moved from the territory of dreams into the territory of plans. She told Damien on their next call. He listened without interrupting, which he was good at. How do you feel about it? He asked, when she'd finished. Terrified, she said honestly. Also, like it's real. For the first time, it feels like an actual thing that could actually happen. It is, he said. It can. She believed him. That was the thing about Damien. He didn't say things he didn't mean, and over the months she'd known him, she'd calibrated to that, had learned to take his words at face value because the face value was what he intended. It was an adjustment, coming from a history of people whose words and intentions didn't always match. She believed him, and she was happy, and the first 3 weeks were manageable. It was the weeks after that that started to cost something. By mid-April, the calls had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way she could have pointed to in a single conversation and said, there. That's when it changed. It was subtler than that. A gradual compression, the way a slow leak changes the pressure in a room before you can identify the source. He was tired in a way that went deeper than jet lag. She could hear it. The Singapore team had hit complications. A regulatory issue that required renegotiating terms with a government body that moved at its own geological pace. A key hire who fell through 3 weeks in. A set of financial projections that turned out to have been based on optimistic assumptions about the regional market that weren't holding up. He talked about these things. When she asked, in the clipped shorthand of someone managing too many problems to give any of them full narrative treatment, the calls started running shorter. Not by design. She didn't think by design. But because he was being pulled in multiple directions, and she could feel the pull even through the phone, the way a man who is genuinely overwhelmed starts to run economy mode on everything that isn't the immediate crisis. She told herself this was temporary. She told herself this was what she'd known to expect. She told herself she was not Jake Holloway's second choice, that she was not her mother waiting in an apartment for a phone to ring, that she was 30 years old and she had chosen this with her eyes open, and that choosing something with your eyes open means accepting the parts that are hard. She was very good at telling herself things. What she couldn't tell herself was that she wasn't scared, that the math she'd been pushing down since February hadn't started running louder, that at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, she wasn't lying in the dark doing the calculation she'd been avoiding, the one that said, he is building something enormous. He is pouring everything he has into it. And you are a waitress with a notebook in New York who is an arrangement that became something real, and arrangements that become real are still, at their core, arrangements, and arrangements can end. She knew this was unfair to him. She knew it was her own fear talking, dressed up in the language of practicality. But fear is not interested in being fair. She kept picking up the calls. She kept being honest, mostly. She kept going to work and feeding Maya's fish twice a week. She'd gotten a key to the apartment from Rachel because Maya had asked if Lily could check on Vesper and Marigold and Captain Hooks on the days Rachel worked late. She did this on Wednesdays and Saturdays. She stood in the apartment that smelled like Damien's cologne in the Vegas background way and watched three small creatures going about their business in the blue-lit tank, and she talked to them, which she was not going to admit to anyone. "Marigold," she said one Wednesday evening in April, crouching to be level with the tank. "You're the assertive one. What would you do?" Marigold swam past with the indifference of a creature that did not traffic in human dilemmas. "Right," Lily said. "Probably the right call." She fed them their pinch of food. She let herself out. She went home and she made tea, and she sat at her kitchen table with her cafe notebook open in front of her, and she tried to think about plans and timelines and Clara Reyes's list of next steps. And instead, she thought about what she would do if the distance did what distance sometimes did. If it stretched the thing between them until it was thinner than what they'd started with, until all that was left was the shape of something that had once been warm. She sat with that for a long time. She did not call Priya, because calling Priya would mean saying it out loud, and saying it out loud would make it more real than she wanted it to be. She closed the notebook and went to bed and did not sleep well and got up and went to work. The decision took shape over 3 weeks in May, slowly, the way bad decisions often do. Not as a single moment of choice, but as an accumulation of small rationalizations that each seem reasonable in isolation and only reveal themselves as a unified disaster in retrospect. She found the first thread on a Thursday evening. She was at the cafe after close, doing the inventory Connie had asked her to finish, when her phone showed a notification from a financial news alert she'd set up months ago out of idle interest. The alert was about Cross Capital Group, about the Singapore expansion specifically. The headline used the words landmark and multi-billion and industry defining, and there was a quote from an industry analyst that described Damien's strategic vision as generational. She read the article in the stockroom, standing between the bulk coffee bags and the extra napkins. Generational. That was the word. She thought about that word for a long time. She thought about what it meant to stand next to something generational. She thought about her notebook with its sketches and crossed-out names. She thought about the gap she'd told him wasn't real, about the thing Priya had said, that the gap was a story she told herself about her own value. And she tried to believe that the way she'd believed it in November, in the restaurant, when his hands were on her face, and the distance between them was measured in inches. She found it harder from inside a stockroom with a food service inventory spreadsheet and a landmark multi-billion industry-defining headline on her phone. The second thread came from Rachel. Damien's sister called her in the second week of May. Not urgently, just to check in, the way Rachel did occasionally because she was a person who maintained relationships with the deliberate, caring effort of someone who had watched her family contract and decided to work against the trend. "He sounds exhausted," Rachel said. Not accusingly, just noting it. "I know," Lily said. "The regulatory issue is still going." "It's more than that." Rachel was quiet for a second. "He does this thing. When something really matters to him and it starts to go wrong, he pulls inward. He doesn't ask for help. He just absorbs everything and keeps going until he breaks something, usually himself." She paused. Maya's mom used to say he was impossible to be with during hard seasons, that there was no room left. Lily sat with this. "He's been calling," she said carefully. "I know. But are you actually talking, or is he giving you the managed version?" She thought about the recent calls, the clipped shorthand, the way the energy in his voice had changed. "He's managing," she said. "Yeah." Rachel exhaled. "I'm not telling you this to worry you. I'm telling you because he doesn't usually let people see it when it's bad. The fact that he's still calling you every week, even the short ones, that's him trying. That's Damien trying." She understood that. She did. But understanding something and being able to hold it without it hurting were not the same operation. The third thread was the one that undid everything. His call on a Tuesday in late May came later than usual, midnight her time, noon Singapore, and she'd been asleep and woke to her phone and answered with the automatic clarity of someone who had made a decision months ago to always pick up. "Sorry," he said immediately. "I should have texted first." "It's fine. What's wrong?" A silence. "The regulatory deal fell through," he said. "Completely. We need to restructure the entire approach. It sets us back 4 months minimum." 4 months. She did the math she didn't want to do. 4 months added to September meant January. January minimum. "Damien," her voice was careful. Are you okay? I'll sort it out. The flatness in his voice was the particular flatness of someone who has passed through upset and come out the other side into grim competence. It's a setback, not a failure. It's fixable. I know it is. I'm asking if you're okay. A pause. I don't have a lot of capacity for that question right now, he said honestly, which she understood was its own kind of answer. She lay in the dark of her bedroom, and she listened to him talk through the restructuring plan in the clipped, efficient way he talked about work things. And she listened to what was underneath it, the exhaustion, the strain of a man carrying something enormous, alone, 12 time zones away from the people who knew him as a person rather than a position. And that was when the math won. Not loudly, not all at once. But in the quiet of that phone call, listening to him manage himself through a conversation that should have been about needing something, she felt the calculation she'd been suppressing complete itself with the cold finality of arithmetic. He needed to be able to do this without managing around her. He needed all of his capacity for the work, for Maya, for the enormous thing he was building. Every bit of energy he spent maintaining them across this distance was energy he couldn't give to the things that were actually, structurally, his responsibility. She was an addition to his life that had started as a favor and turned into something real. But real things could still be bad timing. Real things could still be the wrong fit for the wrong season. Maya's mother had said there was no room left in the hard seasons. Lily believed in him. She believed he was trying. She believed he would keep calling and keep managing and keep doing the careful, deliberate thing he did with everything that mattered to him. And she believed, with a clarity that felt like grief, that his trying was costing him something he couldn't afford right now. That she was, without meaning to be, a drain on a reservoir that was already running low. She thought about what she'd said to Priya's question months ago. People like me have a way of not fitting into lives like yours. She'd let herself be talked out of that. She'd let herself believe that the gap was invented, that the story she told about her own value was just fear talking. But fear, she thought, lying in the dark, has good sources sometimes. Fear is not always wrong. After they hung up, she lay very still for a long time. Then she picked up the phone again. And she did the worst thing she had ever done to someone who trusted her. She called him back 20 minutes later. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't slept yet, which was its own answer to whether he was okay. Lily. His voice had the careful alertness of someone who noticed the call back. I need to say something, she said. Her voice was even. She had decided in those 20 minutes to be even. And I need you to let me say it. A pause. Okay? She had written it out on a piece of paper which she now held in her hand and did not look at, because looking at it made her feel sick. I've been thinking about this for a while, she said. About us. About what this is. Lily. Let me finish. She breathed. I think what happened between us was real, but I think it was also... She stopped, found the next words, the wrong words, carefully chosen. I think you were convenient for me. You were there, and you were kind, and I was still getting over something, and you offered to help, and it turned into something that felt bigger than it was. The silence on the other end of the line was the specific silence of a man who has just heard something hit the ground. You felt bigger than you were, he said. Not a question. I'm not saying it wasn't real. I'm saying I think I needed something, and you were a good person at the right time. She swallowed. Like Jake was before. Different reasons, but don't. His voice was quiet, controlled with effort. Don't put me in that sentence. I'm not trying to hurt you. That is genuinely the most unconvincing sentence I have heard in a long time. She closed her eyes. Damien, you're in the middle of the biggest thing you've ever built. You have Maya. You have... Her voice nearly broke, and she held it. You have a life that doesn't have space for me in it. Not really. Not in the way I'd need. I made space, he said. His voice had dropped into something very flat and very controlled, which she knew by now meant he was in real pain. I've been making space. I know, and it's costing you. You don't get to decide what it costs me. Someone has to. Lily. He said her name, and there was something in it, something cracked, something that was held only by the grip of a man who did not let himself be uncontrolled, and she felt it like a physical thing, felt the damage she was doing in real time. Tell me what this actually is. Don't manage me. What is actually happening? She held the phone. She looked at the piece of paper in her hand. She thought about the article, generational. She thought about Rachel's voice saying no room left. She thought about a 6-year-old girl who needed her father to succeed, who had already had one parent choose differently, who deserved to have the parent she had left be fully present and fully able. I think we want different things, she said. It tasted like ash. I think I need more than the structure you can give right now, and I think you need to be able to do this without dividing yourself. A very long silence. Is that what you think? He said finally. His voice was almost entirely flat. Or is that what you've decided to think because you're scared? She didn't answer that. Lily, quieter now. I know what fear looks like. I've been watching you navigate it since October. I know the difference between what's true and what you're deciding to believe because you think it's the kinder version. Please don't do that, she said. Do what? Know me. It came out broken at the edges. Right now, please. A silence. Fine, he said. And then, after a moment, is this what you want? She made herself say yes. It was one syllable and it cost her more than she had wanted to pay. Another silence. Longer. She could hear him on the other end, breathing, holding whatever he was holding, and she thought about the fact that she had done this to him at midnight Singapore time after a regulatory disaster, and she recognized, too late and clearly, that there was no good time for this, that she had just found the worst one available. Okay, he said. His voice was completely level. Okay. A pause. I won't call again. Damien, you said what you needed to say. I heard it. A beat. Take care of yourself. He hung up. She sat in her dark apartment with the phone in her lap and the paper in her hand, and she thought, there it is. That is the thing you just did. She had done it out of love. She believed that. She had done it because she had decided, in the arithmetic of grief and fear, and the particular damage that comes from watching people you love exhaust themselves trying to hold things together, that the kindest thing she could do for Damien Cross was to remove herself from the equation. She believed this. She also understood very clearly, sitting in the dark, that believing something sincerely did not make it right. She had lied to him. She had used the truth of her fear to build a fiction, had handed him something that looked like honesty and was actually the most dishonest thing she had ever said. She had told him she was a replacement, a convenience, a pattern, and none of it was true. And he had heard all of it and said okay and hung up. And somewhere across 12 time zones, a man who did not say things he didn't mean was sitting in a hotel room at midnight having heard something she absolutely meant not to mean. She did not sleep at all. In the morning, she went to work. She tied her apron. She refilled the sugar dispensers. She did not look at the corner table by the window, which was occupied by a woman with a laptop who left after 45 minutes and never knew it meant anything. The weeks that followed had a particular quality she'd experienced before, in the aftermath of her father's death. The way life keeps asking you to participate in it, even when the interior landscape has gone flat and strange. She got up. She went to work. She called Clara Reyes and worked through the next steps on the licensing process, because forward motion was something she knew how to do, and the cafe plan was the one thing that felt like hers in a way nothing could compromise. She texted Rachel once, briefly. I wanted you to know, we're not in contact anymore. I'm sorry. Rachel took 12 hours to respond and then wrote, I don't understand, but okay, you're still welcome to check on the fish if you want. Lily continued checking on the fish. She needed the small obligation of it. She needed something to take care of. Maya texted her about Captain Hooks twice in June. Lily responded both times. She did not know if this was wise, but she did it because she was not going to abandon a 7-year-old who had trusted her with information about snail behavior, and she drew a hard line there, regardless of everything else. She did not tell Priya the full version. She told her they'd decided the long distance wasn't working, which was true enough in skeleton form, and Priya accepted this with the particular restraint of someone who knew there was more and was waiting to be given it. She ran into Jake Holloway in July. This was a coincidence of the pure and inconvenient variety. She was coming out of a hardware store on West 72nd with a bag of hooks for the cafe's new menu board, and he was walking in. They nearly collided. He said her name with genuine surprise. She said his. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He looked the same. Slightly older, maybe. The particular subtle ease of a man whose life is going well. "You look good," he said. "Thanks." She did not say it back. Not out of cruelty, just because she was tired and it didn't feel necessary. "Serena and we got engaged last spring." "Congratulations," she said, and meant it cleanly, with the clarity of someone for whom that chapter had genuinely closed. She'd thought seeing him would feel like something. It felt like running into an old coworker. "That's really good, Jake." He seemed slightly taken aback by how uncomplicated she was about it. Are you seeing anyone?" She thought about 12 time zones, about a phone call she'd ended, about a man who said okay and "I won't call again" and had kept both promises to the letter. "No," she said. "Right." He nodded, adjusted. "I heard you were, actually. Someone big in finance, or—" "That was a while ago," she said. "It's over." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She shifted the bag to her other hand. It was the right thing. She said it with the specific quality of someone who believes something and also understands that believing it doesn't make it hurt less. Jake looked at her for a second. "You seem different," he said. "Probably," she said. "It happens." She said goodbye and walked away and did not look back, and she thought about the fact that she had stood at that wedding in a dusty rose dress and wanted Jake Holloway to see that she was fine. And now she was genuinely fine about Jake Holloway, and the thing that was not fine at all had nothing to do with him. Progress was like that sometimes. It came sideways. Tis. The call from Priya came on a Saturday afternoon in August, which was when everything shifted, not a check-in call. Priya had the particular energy of someone who has been sitting on something for a long time and has decided that today is the day. "I talked to Rachel," Priya said. Lily went still. "Priya, don't. I know you told me the reduced version, and I respected that because I thought you needed time. But I talked to Rachel, and I'm calling you now because I'm your best friend, and I know what actually happened, and I need you to hear something." Lily sat down. "Okay." "You lied to him." The words landed like something flat and solid. "Yes," Lily said quietly. "You told him he was a replacement. You told him he was convenience." Priya's voice was not angry. It was the voice of someone who is being very precise because precision is what the moment requires. "Lily, you told the most honest person I have ever encountered, and I met him for 3 hours at my wedding. You told him the most dishonest thing you have ever said because you thought it was kind. I thought it was necessary. You thought you were a burden. You thought you were in the way of his success. You decided, without asking him, that he would be better without you, and then you made that choice for him by lying." Lily said nothing. "And here's the thing," Priya's voice shifted. "He believed you. Rachel says he came back for his first 3-week visit in June, and he didn't say much. He took Maya places. He went back. He's not calling anyone. He's just working." A pause. "Because you told him something he didn't want to believe, and then he decided to believe it. Because you've never lied to him before, and he didn't have a reason not to take you at your word." Lily was quiet for a long time. Outside her window, August was doing something brutal to the city. The air thick and hot and heavy, the light without mercy. "I don't know how to fix it," she said finally. "I know you don't," Priya said. "I'm not calling to tell you how to fix it. I'm calling to tell you what it is." Her voice was careful now, the therapist voice underneath the friend voice. "You made a choice out of love that was actually a choice out of fear. And you built a story that hurt someone who trusted you, and you've been calling it a sacrifice. And I'm telling you, as someone who loves you, that it was fear wearing the costume of sacrifice. And you need to be honest about that before you can do anything else." Lily sat with this. It landed differently from her own version of the argument, the one she'd been running in circles all summer. Priya was not saying anything she hadn't thought, but hearing it said plainly by someone who had seen all of it and was not being unkind. It was different. It removed the distance she'd been using to manage the knowledge. "He's in Singapore until January," she said. "Probably. He told me he wouldn't call." "I know. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." "No," Priya said. "He doesn't." Lily looked at her hands, at the cafe notebook on the table, open to a page of plans, at the August light coming through the window, too bright, too much. "What do I do?" she said. Priya was quiet for a second, then, "You could start by telling the truth. The actual truth. Not the managed version, not the version you assembled to protect him." A pause. "The version where you were terrified and you did the worst thing available because you thought it was the kindest, and you were wrong. He might not—" She stopped. "He might be done." "He might be," Priya said. "That's the cost of what you did. You don't get to know in advance." Her voice was gentle now, the hard part said. "But you don't get to keep living inside the lie either. Even if it's just for your own sake. You need to tell the truth." Lily sat in the August heat for a long time after the call ended. She thought about a man in a Singapore hotel room at midnight saying, "Okay," in a voice that was held together by will alone. She thought about a 7-year-old girl who watched the fish tank on Wednesdays and sent her pictures of Captain Hooks asserting dominance. She thought about a corner cafe table, and rain, and an umbrella held over both of them, and 12 blocks walked in the dark. She thought about the deal they'd made, one night, one wedding, and how little it had stayed in its category. How badly she had underestimated what it would become, how thoroughly she had failed to protect herself from it, and how, in trying to protect him, she had done the thing she'd most wanted to avoid. She opened her notebook. She turned to a blank page. At the top she wrote, "What is actually true?" And then she wrote it down. All of it, the real version, without the management, and without the fear dressed as sacrifice. She wrote it because Priya was right that she needed to be honest with herself before she could be honest with anyone else. She wrote for a long time. When she was done, she sat looking at the page. And the thing that was true was still frightening, but it was also undeniably clear. She loved him. She had loved him for a long time. She had done something terrible out of love and fear in equal measure, and she had called it kindness, and it wasn't. January was 5 months away. 5 months was not nothing. But it was also not nothing that she had the truth now, and the truth was a place to start. 5 months was not nothing, and Lily spent them the way you spend time when you've made a decision you can't yet act on, with the particular focused restlessness of someone who has somewhere to be and has to wait for the calendar to agree. She worked. She called Clara Reyes twice more and moved through the licensing checklist with a methodical, almost aggressive intention, because the cafe plan was the thing she could control, and she was going to control it. She walked neighborhoods on her days off, looking at empty storefronts the way you look at them when they're no longer hypothetical, evaluating light and foot traffic and the specific quality of a block's energy, the intangible thing that makes one corner feel like community and another feel like transit. She found 3 spaces she liked and photographed them and added notes to her notebook. She called a small business attorney Clara had recommended. She opened a separate savings account and named it, in the banking app, Actual Plan. She checked on the fish every Wednesday and Saturday. She and Maya had developed, over the summer and into fall, a text correspondence that existed in its own quiet space, separate from everything complicated with Damien. Maya sent her pictures of things she found interesting. A spiderweb outside the school window, a library book about tidal zones, a drawing she'd done of an anglerfish that was genuinely impressive for a 7-year-old, the bioluminescent light rendered in yellow crayon with careful radiating lines. Lily sent back photographs of things she encountered at the cafe, a particularly good latte art that Connie had attempted and partially succeeded at, a stray cat that had been sitting outside the window for 3 consecutive Tuesdays as if auditioning for residency, the first frost on the awning in October. Neither of them mentioned Damien directly. Lily thought Maya was either too young to navigate it or old enough to know better. She suspected the latter. Rachel called once in October, brief and practical, to say that Damien was coming back for his 3-week visit in November, his last one before the January return. Lily did not ask how he was. Rachel did not offer, but before she hung up, she said, "He still has the photo," which Lily didn't ask about either, because asking about it would require knowing what it meant, and she wasn't ready for that yet. She told Priya everything in September, finally, the real version. Sat in Priya's apartment on a Sunday afternoon with tea that went cold and talked for 2 hours, and said all of it without managing any of it. The fear, the calculation, the lie, the arithmetic of grief that had passed itself off as sacrifice. Priya listened without interrupting, which was its own form of love, and when Lily was done, she said, "Okay, so what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet," Lily said. "You do," Priya said. "You just don't know if it'll work. There's a difference." "A significant one, yes." Priya refilled Lily's tea. You're going to tell him the truth. That's what you're going to do. The question is how. He said he wouldn't call again. He said he wouldn't call. He didn't say he wouldn't listen. Priya looked at her steadily. He's an honest person, Lily. Honest people respond to honesty, even when it's late, even when it's hard. What if he doesn't? Then you live with that, and you know you told the truth, which is more than you can say right now. She said it without cruelty, just plainly. The lie is the thing that's eating you, not the outcome. The lie. Lily turned her tea mug in her hands. I know, she said. So the lie has to end first, before anything else. Lily sat with this for a long time. Then she nodded once, and Priya nodded back, and they sat in the October light of the apartment and drank their tea, and didn't say anything else about it, because some decisions don't need more conversation after they've been made. They just need time to become real. And November came. She knew he was in New York because Rachel texted her on a Tuesday. He arrived this morning. Maya's very happy, and because the city, which obviously knew nothing about it, somehow felt different in the particular way that cities don't feel different at all, and you feel the difference anyway. She went to work. She made the autumn specials, a apple cider she'd been refining since last year, a sweet potato soup that she'd gotten right on the third attempt, a morning pastry with cardamom and pear that Connie said was the best thing that had ever come out of the cafe kitchen. She served them, and she took orders, and she wiped down tables, and she waited. Not for him to come to her. She had decided, somewhere in the long, careful months since August, that she was not going to wait for things anymore. Waiting was what she'd done her whole life. Waited for her father to come back, waited for Jake to choose her, waited for her life to become the version she'd been imagining. She was done with the waiting posture. Whatever happened with Damien, she was going to be the one who moved. She just needed to find the words first. The right ones. Not managed, not performed, just true. She worked on them in the notebook, between the cafe plans and the licensing notes and the sketched floor plans. She wrote drafts and crossed them out. Not because she was scripting what she'd say, she knew better than to script a conversation with a man who would see through a script in 6 seconds, but because the writing helped her understand what she actually meant, underneath the fear and the guilt and the months of living inside a lie she'd told out of love. What she actually meant was this. I was wrong. Not just strategically wrong, not just emotionally wrong, but fundamentally dishonest in a way that I did not have the right to be. I made a decision about your capacity without asking you. I decided what you needed and what I was worth, and I built a fiction out of those two decisions and handed it to you as truth. And that was a worse thing than the fear that drove it, because you deserved the actual truth, the messy, frightened, real version. And I gave you a story instead. What she actually meant was, I love you. Not past tense, not as a conclusion I reached after analysis. I love you in the present tense, which is the only tense that matters. And I have for a long time. And I was afraid of what that meant for your life. And I made a unilateral call about both of our lives based on that fear. And I was wrong, and I'm sorry. She wrote that down, not as a script, but as a fact she needed to be clear on before she said anything out loud to anyone. Then she put the notebook away and went to talk to Jake Holloway, which was not on her list of plans, but was, it turned out, urgently necessary. He called her. This was the thing she had not anticipated. Not Damien calling. She'd known that wasn't happening, but Jake. His name on her phone on a Wednesday morning in the second week of November, while she was at the cafe doing the morning prep. She almost didn't pick up. Then she did, because ignoring things had not historically served her. Jake, she said. Hey. I know this is weird. He sounded slightly uncomfortable, which was a version of Jake she didn't encounter often. I need to tell you something, and I want to tell you before you hear it another way. She stopped wiping down the counter. Okay. I ran into someone from the wedding thing. Rachel Cross, Damien Cross's sister. He paused. I didn't know who she was at first. We were at the same industry dinner, and we got to talking, and she mentioned her brother, and I put it together. Lily was very still. Okay, she said carefully. She didn't tell me anything private. She was actually pretty guarded. Another pause. But she said her brother came back last month for a few weeks and apparently went looking for you at the cafe. A beat. I guess you weren't there. Or you were, but I don't know exactly what happened. Her heart did something abrupt. When was this? October, I think. Maybe late October. He sounded like a man delivering information he wasn't entirely comfortable being the delivery vehicle for. I just thought, I don't know. You mentioned it was over when I saw you in July. I thought you should know that he apparently didn't entirely think so. She stood in the empty cafe with the morning light coming through the windows, and her hand tight around the phone. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out quieter than intended. Are you okay? I'm fine, she breathed. Thank you for telling me, Jake, really. Sure. He seemed relieved to be finished with it. Take care of yourself, Lily. She hung up. She stood in the cafe for approximately 2 minutes, completely still, while the information rearranged itself in her chest. October. He'd come back in October, his 3-week visit, and he'd come to Birch and Brew. She had been working every shift in October. She hadn't taken any time off, hadn't changed her schedule, which meant he'd come on a day she wasn't there, or a time she wasn't there, or he'd stood outside and not come in, because he'd said he wouldn't call, and standing at the door of a cafe and walking away was a different kind of keeping that promise. She didn't know which. She wouldn't know until she asked. She took off her apron. She called Connie from the back hallway and said she needed 2 hours. She was sorry, it was important, and Connie, who had seen everything in 30 years of running this cafe and was not a woman who required extensive explanation, said, go, she'd cover the morning. Lily went. She didn't go to the apartment. She went to Rachel's first because Rachel was the person she had a text relationship with, and the person who had said he still has the photo in October, and if she was going to do this, she was going to do it correctly. Rachel opened the door on the second knock and looked at Lily for about 3 seconds and said, I thought it would take you longer. He went to the cafe in October, Lily said. Yes. Did he go in? Rachel was quiet for a second. He walked there. He stood outside for about 15 minutes, then he came back. She studied Lily's face. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. Lily breathed through this. A man who doesn't say things he doesn't mean, standing outside a cafe for 15 minutes in the October cold, not going in, walking away. That was its own sentence. It said, I'm not done. It also said, but I heard what you told me, and I'm not going to ignore what you said. He was trying to respect a decision she'd made out of fear while simultaneously being unable to entirely stay away. She understood this completely. He's at the apartment? She asked. He took Maya to school this morning. He'll be back by noon. Rachel looked at her steadily. Are you going to tell him the truth? Yes. The whole truth, not a version of it. The whole thing. Lily met her eyes. I owe him that. Rachel looked at her for another long moment. Then she stepped back. Come in, she said. I'll make coffee. He'll be back in an hour. She did not wait at Rachel's. After 20 minutes and half a mug of coffee, she stood up and said she was going to the apartment to wait, and Rachel gave her the spare key that had been in her kitchen drawer since Lily had returned it in March, which was its own kind of statement, and Lily took it and went. She let herself in. The apartment was quiet in the way of a place where a child lives but is temporarily absent, the particular organized chaos of Maya's presence visible everywhere, the fish tank glowing blue on the dresser visible through the half-open bedroom door, the drawing still on the refrigerator, a new one added since Lily had last been here, which was a detailed rendering of what appeared to be a deep-sea thermal vent ecosystem, labeled in Maya's careful handwriting. She stood in the kitchen and looked at it for a while. Captain Hooks was moving along the back of the tank, visible from here in the late morning light. Vesper and Marigold circled each other in the unhurried way of creatures who had been in the same small world long enough to stop being curious about it. She sat at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the surface. She breathed. She heard the key in the door at 12:17. He came in the way he came into most spaces, quietly, without announcement, already moving toward whatever the next task was. He had his coat half off before he processed that there was someone at his kitchen table, and the half-second of stillness that followed was complete. Then he saw it was her. He finished taking the coat off. He hung it on the hook by the door. He was wearing a dark sweater, and he looked like a man who had been working hard for a long time, the evidence of it in his face. Not older exactly, but more drawn, the particular leanness of someone who had been running on discipline and not enough of anything else. He looked at her. She looked at him. Lily, he said. His voice was careful, neutral, with effort. I used your spare key, she said. Rachel gave it to me. I should have asked first. I'm sorry. It's fine. He moved to the counter, stood there with his hands resting on it, looking at her with the contained, precise attention she knew so well. Waiting. She had thought about what to say for 3 months. She had written it in a notebook and revised it and understood it and let it settle into something she actually meant rather than something she'd constructed. And now that he was here, looking at her across his kitchen, all the careful preparation reduced itself to the simplest possible version. I lied to you, she said. He didn't move. In May, on that call, she kept her eyes on his face. I lied. Not about everything. I was scared, that part was true, but I built a story out of the fear and I handed it to you as something true. And it wasn't. She breathed. You were not a replacement. You were never convenient. I didn't need something and find you available. What happened between us was the least convenient thing I've experienced in years, and I chose it anyway. Every step, and I knew what it was. She held his gaze. I knew what it was, and I told you it was something else because I decided you needed to be free of me, and I made that choice for you without asking you, and that was wrong. He was very still. Not the angry kind of still, the listening kind. The way he went still when something important was being said, and he was giving it his full attention. Why? He said. Because I was afraid, she said. Because the regulatory deal fell through and you sounded like a man who was holding something together by force, and I did the math, the bad math, the math that fear does when you let it drive, and I decided I was a cost you couldn't afford. I decided I was in the way. She paused. I decided that for you, without asking. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From me. She said it plainly. From having to divide yourself. I'd heard enough about what the hard seasons do to your relationships, and I was terrified of being the thing that broke under the weight of it, the thing you eventually had to let go of. And I thought, she stopped, found the honest version. I thought if I ended it, I could call it a choice instead of a loss. I could frame it as sacrifice instead of fear. She looked at the table for a second, then back at him. Priya told me in August that I dressed fear up as sacrifice, and I've been sitting with that ever since because she was right. The kitchen was very quiet. The fish tank hummed softly from the bedroom. Damien, she made herself say the next part, the hardest part. I know you said you wouldn't call again. I know what you meant when you said it. I'm not here to argue with that decision or tell you what you should do about it. She paused. I'm here because I owe you the truth, and the truth is that I love you. Not past tense, not something I figured out in retrospect. I love you, and I have for a long time, and I was so afraid of not being enough for your life that I destroyed the thing we had before you got a chance to decide for yourself whether it was worth keeping. She stopped. She had said all of it. There was nothing left in the notebook version, and there was nothing left in the real version. She had said the whole truth, the actual one, and now it was in the air of his kitchen, and she had to sit with whatever happened next. He was quiet for so long that she started to feel the specific quality of a silence that might be going in the wrong direction. She kept her hands flat on the table. She had decided, months ago, that she was done managing outcomes in advance. Whatever he said, she would hear it. I went to the cafe, he said finally. I know. Jake told me. Rachel mentioned it to him at an event. He called me this morning. I went twice. He looked at the counter. The first time, September, I stood on the block and I turned around and went home. The second time, October, I walked to the door. He paused. I stood outside for a while. I couldn't go in. Why not? Because you told me something and I had to decide whether to believe it. He looked at her. I've spent 6 months having the same argument with myself. Half of me knew. I knew you. I knew the way you talked about things that mattered. I could hear when your voice wasn't right. Half of me knew what I heard on that phone call wasn't the whole truth. He turned the coffee mug on the counter. The other half said, she's the most honest person you know. If she said it, she meant it. Don't make her into someone different because it's convenient. Which half won? Neither, he said. I just stood outside a cafe for 15 minutes and went home. He looked at her directly. Because I needed you to tell me. I needed it to come from you. I wasn't going to show up at your door and make you deal with me if you'd made a real decision. It wasn't a real decision, she said quietly. It was fear making decisions and calling itself something better. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his face was doing the thing she'd learned to read. The very faint, very controlled signal of a man who has been carrying something heavy and is very carefully setting it down. I know, he said. She blinked. You know? I knew. He exhaled, short and quiet. I knew it wasn't real. I just needed you to know it too. He moved from the counter, came to the table, pulled out the chair across from hers and sat down. And they were level now. A kitchen table between them the same way there'd been cafe tables between them for the better part of a year. I spent 3 months being furious at you, and then 3 months being... He stopped. I don't have a good word for it. The kind of missing something that doesn't stop feeling like missing it even when you try to work through it. I'm sorry, she said. The words were inadequate, and she said them anyway because they were what she had. I'm genuinely sorry. I should have trusted you with the actual thing, the fear, the calculation, all of it. I should have said I was scared instead of building something false out of it. Yes, he said simply. Not forgiving or unforgiving, just honest. I know I don't get to decide what happens next, she said. I made the wrong call and there's a cost to that, and I'm not asking you to pretend there isn't. He looked at her steadily. In the kitchen light of a November morning, with his coat on the hook and the fish tank humming and 6 months of hard distance between them, he looked like someone who had been waiting for something specific to become clear. Like a man who had been doing his own math, in hotel rooms and office buildings, and on the sidewalk outside a cafe, and had reached the same conclusion she had, but from the other direction. Lily, he said, tell me what you want. She had not been asked this cleanly in a long time, without scaffolding or context or the implication that the answer had limits. Just, tell me what you want. She told him, I want to try again. I want to do it honestly this time. The whole thing, all the parts that are difficult, without managing the outcome in advance. I want to not decide for you what you need. She looked at him. I want to be the person you call when the regulatory deal falls through, not the one you manage around. He was quiet. I know January is 6 weeks away, she said. I'm not asking for everything right now. I'm asking if there's something left to come back to. He looked at her for a long time. She held it. She had decided she was done looking away from things that mattered. There was never nothing left, he said. That was always going to be the problem. She felt something in her chest release, not dramatically, not with relief so complete it erased everything that preceded it, but the specific release of something that has been held tight for a long time, finally being allowed to breathe. Okay, she said. But I need you to mean it, he said. Not the version you're telling me to protect me, the version that's actually true. He held her gaze. If you're scared, I need you to say you're scared. If it gets too much, I need you to say that instead of building me a story. Yes, she said. I'm not easy to be with in hard seasons, he said. Rachel probably told you. Maya's mother left partly because of it. He said it without self-pity, just factually. I close off. I manage things instead of feeling them. I'll do it to you, and I won't always notice when I'm doing it. I know, she said. I watched you do it on a phone call from 12 time zones away. And? And I should have said something instead of making a unilateral decision. She met his eyes. I'll say something next time. He held her gaze for another moment. Then something in his face shifted. The thing that happened when he stopped holding himself at the controlled distance, when he decided, with the full deliberateness he brought to every decision, to close the space. Okay, he said. She breathed. Okay, he said again, quieter. He reached across the kitchen table and put his hand over hers, the same way he had in the cafe last November, when she'd told him she was going to miss him and he'd said, I know, and they'd sat in the warmth of the empty cafe and held on. It was the same gesture. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a while, in the quiet kitchen with the November light and the fish tank's small blue glow and 6 months of hard honesty between them that was not resolved, not erased, not made retroactively fine, just named. Set down. The thing that they would have to carry forward with them as part of what they were. That was how real things worked. They didn't start clean. They started where they were. 6 weeks later, Damien came home. Not to the hotel, not to a temporary space. Home, to the apartment on the 16th floor, with Maya's drawings on the refrigerator, and the fish tank in the bedroom, and the particular quality of a place that has been lived in by people who belong there. Lily was not there when he arrived. She was at Birch and Brew, working the closing shift, and she knew he'd landed because he texted at 4:15, on the ground. "See you tonight?" And she texted back, "Yes, come to the cafe at close." He arrived at 8:50, 5 minutes before close. The cafe was nearly empty, a couple lingering over dessert, the older paper-grading professor who had become, over the years, as much a fixture of the place as the mismatched chairs. Lily saw him come in through the glass door and felt the specific thing she still felt when she saw him, which had not diminished with 6 months of difficulty and was not going to, and she understood this was the kind of thing you stopped fighting and started being honest about. He sat at the corner table. She brought him coffee without asking. "You look tired," she said. "I slept on the plane." "That's not the same thing." "I know." He wrapped his hands around the mug. He did look tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been running hard for a long time and has finally, today, stopped running. "It's done," he said. "The Singapore operation is functional. The team can manage it without my physical presence." "You built it," she said. "We built it." He looked up. "My team did most of the actual building. I just held the architecture together." "That's not a small thing." "No," he agreed, "but it's finished." He held her gaze across the cafe table in the familiar particular light that she knew so well, that she'd served him in and talked to him in and learned him in over more than a year. "I'm home." She looked at him. 2 words. He didn't use them carelessly. "How's Maya?" she asked, because it was the right first question. His face changed, the way it always changed when Maya came into any conversation, the unguarded quality of it. "She spent 45 minutes this morning telling me everything that's happened with the fish tank while I was gone. Apparently Captain Hooks attempted to escape and was only prevented because Vesper startled him." "I was there for that," Lily said. "It was dramatic." She said you talked her through it via text. "It required real-time support." Something in his expression settled into warmth that was quiet and complete. "She missed you," he said. She'd never say it that directly. But she talks about you like you're part of the furniture, the good kind. Lily felt this land somewhere it was going to stay. "I missed her too." The couple by the window gathered their coats. The professor closed his laptop. Lily went around and turned the sign on the door and came back, and the cafe settled into the specific hush of after-close. The steam wand silent, the radio off, just the low light and the smell of coffee, and something that felt, in this moment, like an exhale that had been held for 6 months. She sat across from him, not with a counter between them, not standing, sat at the table like the person who belonged there. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay?" "When you came to the apartment in November, when you told me," he paused, finding words with the care he brought to all the things that mattered. "I want you to know that I heard all of it. The fear, the calculation, the thing you said about protecting me." He looked at her steadily. "And I need you to understand that I've never needed protecting from you. I needed you to trust me enough to let me make my own decisions." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." "I know you are." He set the mug down. "I'm not saying it to keep the record. I'm saying it because it matters for what comes next. For us not doing that again. Either of us. Me closing off, you deciding unilaterally. Both of those things broke what we had." He held her gaze. "They can't be the pattern." "They won't be," she said. "I won't let them be. I'll say the scared version instead of the managed version. And I'll say when it's too much instead of going quiet." "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment in the after-close quiet of the cafe that had been the beginning of all of it, where he'd come with his contracts and his black coffee and his unspoken quality of a man who needed a place to be still, where she'd brought him soup and asked if he had rough days and meant it, where she'd told him about a wedding she didn't want to face alone, and he'd said, "I could go with you," without making it a bigger thing than it was, and then it had become a very big thing, and neither of them had entirely seen it coming. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and set a key on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. "Not the spare," he said. "A copy of the main one. Rachel has the spare." A beat. If you want it. She understood what he was offering. Not a dramatic declaration, not a negotiated arrangement, just a key. A daily, ordinary, unglamorous symbol of someone deciding you are part of the structure of their life, that you have access, that you don't need to wait to be let in. She picked it up. Yes, she said. He nodded once. She closed her hand around it, and it was cold from his coat pocket, and it was going to warm up, and she thought, this is how things actually happen. Not in the cinematic version, not in the version where fear gets resolved cleanly and distance closes without cost and people say the right things at the right time. In the version where you lie out of love and spend 6 months understanding why that was wrong, where you stand outside a cafe and can't go in, where you sit across a kitchen table and say the scary version instead of the managed one, where you put a key on a table in an empty cafe after close and the other person picks it up and says yes. Messy, true, better for it. January became February. February became spring. Lily signed the lease on a space in early March, a ground floor unit on West 81st Street, corner location, big windows, exactly the natural light she'd been looking for. She stood in the empty space on the day she signed, afternoon sun coming through the unwashed glass, and she thought, there it is. Not with drama, just with the quiet recognition of something that had been on its way for a long time finally arriving. She called her mother first, then Priya. Then Damien, who picked up on the second ring and listened to her describe the windows and the corner angle and the square footage with the specific patient attention he gave things that mattered to him. And when she finished, he said, I want to see it. Tomorrow? Tonight, if you can get me in. She got him in. He stood in the empty space with his hands in his pockets, turning slowly, looking at the ceiling height and the wall lines and the light. Maya came with them. She'd been at school all day and had insisted on not being left behind, and she walked the perimeter of the space with her hands out, trailing her fingers along the walls, the way children claim territory. This one, Maya said, stopping at a corner. This is where people will sit when they want to be in the best spot. How do you know it's the best spot? Lily asked. Because the light comes from 2 directions. She looked up at the windows, one on each wall of the corner. In the morning it'll be warm. In the afternoon, it'll be bright, but not hot. She said it with the confident authority of a 7-year-old scientist. This is the optimal location. Damien looked at Lily. Lily looked at Damien. She's right, Lily said. She's always right, he said, in the tone of someone who has made peace with this fact. Maya went to examine the kitchen door, having completed her initial assessment of the dining room territory. Lily stood in the corner with the 2-direction light, and she thought about the anglerfish in the deep ocean, making their own glow in the place where no light reached from outside. She thought about the journal page where she'd written what is actually true, and then written the honest version underneath it. She thought about 12 blocks in October rain and an umbrella held over 2 people, and the way certain things, once they take root, don't ask permission to grow. I don't have a name yet, she said. I know. He was looking at the space. You'll find it. I might need help. He turned to look at her. I'm here, he said. Simply the way he said the things he meant. She looked back at him. In the corner light, in the empty space that was going to become something, she thought about every iteration of afraid she'd been. Afraid of not being enough, afraid of being left, afraid of wanting things that might not survive contact with reality. She thought about how long she'd been practicing the managed version of herself, the one that cut losses early and called it wisdom. She was done with the managed version. I know you are, she said. The cafe opened in September, which felt right. A year from the month she'd stood in a stockroom reading the word generational on her phone and felt the fear win for the first time. The permits had been a process. The build-out had been a longer process. There had been a week in June where the hood ventilation system failed an inspection, and she'd sat on the floor of the empty kitchen and cried for 20 minutes out of sheer exhaustion, which was not elegant but was honest. Damien had found her there, having let himself in with his copy of the space key she'd given him in April, and he'd sat down on the floor beside her without comment and handed her a bottle of water. I thought you had a board meeting, she said. It's done. You didn't have to come. I know. He opened the water for her. I wanted to. She drank the water. He sat on the tile floor in his work clothes and didn't say anything about the ventilation system or the inspection or the timeline, because he understood that sometimes the thing someone needs is not a solution, but a person on the floor beside them. This, she had learned, was what he was good at. The showing up, the steady presence, the quality of staying that was not dramatic and was everything. He didn't fix things unnecessarily. He didn't offer solutions she hadn't asked for, or he tried not to, and when he did, she called him on it, and he acknowledged it, and it didn't turn into anything, because they'd both gotten better at the honesty, and the honest version was usually shorter than the managed one. Maya had designed the logo. This was not something that had been planned. She'd simply produced it one Saturday afternoon, a precise pencil drawing of a small, glowing circle surrounded by radiating lines, like the anglerfish's light, and had presented it to Lily with the matter-of-fact energy of someone delivering completed work. Lily had looked at it for a long time and then asked if she could use it. Maya had said, "That's what it's for." They had a graphic designer turn it into something print-ready, and it had become the mark on the door, the stamp on the cups, the emblem on the menu that Lily had finally written in full, "No More Specials" board shorthand. Under the logo, in clean type, the name she had finally found. Not the ones she'd crossed out in the notebook, not the ones that sounded like a cafe from a distance, but the one that sounded, when you said it, like something you'd already heard before. Birch and Bloom. Named partly for Connie's cafe, which had given her the years and the training and the steady foundation of a place run by someone who knew what mattered. And partly for the other thing, the quality of something that starts contained, a name in bark, and then opens. Connie had come to the opening and hugged Lily for a long time and said nothing, which was the right response. Priya came with her husband and stayed for 3 hours and cried twice, which was also the right response. Rachel came with her kids and her husband and sat in the corner table that Maya had identified as optimal and said the coffee was the best she'd had in New York, which Lily suspected was generosity but appreciated anyway. Maya was there when the doors opened. She stood beside Lily at 10 in the morning when the first customer walked in, a woman with a stroller who ordered a cortado and a pastry and didn't know she was the first person ever to order anything in this space. And Maya watched the transaction with her scientist's attention and then looked up at Lily and said simply, "It works." "It does," Lily agreed. "I knew it would." "I know you did." Maya nodded, satisfied, and went to take up her position at the corner table with her current library book, Tidal Ecosystems. She'd moved on from deep sea. And Lily went back to the counter, and her cafe was open and alive around her, and she stood in it like a person who belonged there. The evening after the opening, when the last customer had left and the staff, 2 people she'd hired, a barista named Dev, and a cook named Helen, who was better than Lily had expected and possibly better than Lily on her worst days, had gone home, and the space was quiet and hers in the particular way of a place after close, Lily sat at the counter with her shoes off and her feet up on the stool rail, and she was, without performing it, happy. She was tired. Her feet ached. The cortado machine had developed a temperamental quality in the afternoon rush that she was going to have to address tomorrow. She'd run out of the cardamom pastry by noon and had needed to improvise, which had worked but only barely. The ventilation system had performed as required, and she'd felt, every time the hood hummed to life, a specific vindictive satisfaction. She was tired and imperfect, and the cafe was real and hers, and she was, without managing it, happy. She heard the key in the lock at 8:15. She didn't look up. She knew the sound. Damien came in carrying takeout containers from the Taiwanese place in Brooklyn, which he set on the counter without announcement. He'd brought Maya earlier for the opening and taken her home at 7 for school tomorrow, and now he was back. He came back. He always came back, 3 weeks or 6 months or an evening. He kept the promises he made. He sat on the stool beside her. He looked at the space, the closed cafe, the warm light, the small glowing logo on the door that had come from his daughter's pencil. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Like I've been waiting for this for 6 years and it's smaller than I imagined and exactly right." He nodded. "That's usually how it works." "Did you know that?" "Not until the first major thing I built was operational. Then I knew." He opened the takeout containers and handed her chopsticks. The size of the dream and the size of the real thing are never the same. The real thing is always smaller in some ways and bigger in others. She ate a dumpling. "What's bigger?" "The part you didn't know to want." He looked at her. "The part you didn't put in the plan because you didn't know it was available." She held that for a moment. She thought about what she hadn't planned for. The corner table and the black coffee and the October rain. The favor that turned into something real. The lies she'd told out of love and the 6 months of learning what love actually required, which was not sacrifice and not management, but honesty. The real version, the whole version, offered without guarantees. She thought about a 7-year-old scientist who designed logos on Saturday afternoons and named her fish after her assessment of their personalities and told her father, without apology, that he was better on Tuesdays and Fridays. She thought about this man beside her, eating takeout on a stool in her empty cafe at 8:15 on a Wednesday, who had walked 12 blocks in rain and stood outside a door he couldn't go through and come back anyway, who had asked her once what she actually wanted and meant it with no conditions attached. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for the whole thing. From the beginning." He was quiet for a second. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She held his gaze. "I want to." She paused. "You showed up from the first night. You just kept showing up even when I gave you reasons not to." "You gave me one reason not to," he said, "and it didn't hold. Because you knew it wasn't true. Because I knew you." He said it simply, without decoration. "I know you." She looked at him in the warm light of her cafe. Outside, the city was doing its evening thing, the particular aliveness of a Wednesday night, people going places, the sound of traffic and voices, and all the ordinary music of a city that does not concern itself with your private history, that just keeps going, indifferent and alive. Inside, the fish tank was at home on the 16th floor, and Damien Cross was eating dumplings on a stool in her new cafe, and Maya was probably reading about tidal ecosystems in the apartment that had a spare key in Rachel's drawer and a main key in Lily's coat pocket, and the logo on the door was a small glowing circle with radiating lines, a child's drawing of a creature that makes its own light in the deepest dark. This was not the version she had planned. This was the version she hadn't known to want. The part you didn't put in the plan because you didn't know it was available. She ate another dumpling. She didn't look away from him. "I love you," she said. He looked at her. In his face, the thing that usually stayed controlled was not controlled, was just present, just there, the actual thing without management. "I know," he said. "I love you too." He said it the way he said everything true, without embellishment, without the theatrical weight of a moment that is performing itself. Just the fact of it, stated plainly, the way he stated all the facts that mattered, the way he had said, "I'll come back in every 3 weeks, and I'm here, and I know you." They finished the takeout. He washed the containers in her new kitchen sink because he was the kind of man who cleaned up. She wiped down the counter that was already clean because she was the kind of woman who couldn't leave a surface unwiped after a long day. At some point, the radio that Dev had left on in the kitchen drifted through the pass-through, something low and instrumental, and Damien said, without particularly planning it, "Dance with me." She looked at him. "There's a radio," he said. "There's space. Maya's asleep." He held out a hand matter-of-factly, the same way he'd offered an arm at a wedding 14 months ago, the first time they'd been two people performing something that was more real than they were prepared to admit. She took his hand. She always took his hand. They danced in the closed cafe, slowly, without an audience, without performance. He was still not a natural dancer in the showy sense. She still stepped on his foot once and did not apologize. The radio played something that had no lyrics and asked nothing of them. This was not the moment of the story. This was after the story, the part that doesn't get told because it's made of ordinary things. Tuesday mornings and Friday evenings. A child who sent pictures of her fish and designed logos on Saturdays. A cafe with imperfect ventilation and a corner table with two-direction light. Two people who had lied to each other, one by omission and one by design, and had chosen to be honest instead, and were building something out of that choice every day. Real love is not the feeling. The feeling is the beginning. Real love is the verb, the showing up, the staying, the choosing of honesty over management, the willingness to say I'm scared instead of building something false and calling it protection. It is the key you put on a table and the one that is picked up. It is the door you stand outside of for 15 minutes, and the hand that opens it anyway. It is not the deal you made. It is the choice you make after the deal ends, and after that, every ordinary day until the ordinary days become the thing you were always building toward. Lily Bennett stood in the cafe she had dreamed for 6 years, in the arms of a man she had loved for one, and the city went on outside the windows, and the fish swam in their tanks 16 floors up, and Maya slept in her room with the Tidal Ecosystems book, and the story was not over. It was just, finally, actually beginning.